So my brother had an apartment right next to my mom's. I was staying the night at my mom's, but me and my brother decided to watch a movie at his apartment because he has a bigger TV, and my mom had already fallen asleep. Anyways, we watched a movie or two, and eventually he went to sleep, and I did too not long after. So the dream, or nightmare, started with me laying down in my brother's spare room on a mattress on the floor. And someone had just walked out of the room, so I was alone, and I started looking around. I looked at the closet door, which was right in front of my mattress, and I started staring at the open closet door, when out of nowhere, an all-black face peered around the corner and was staring at me. I had 3 brothers that would all mess with me, so in my dream I started mocking the thing in the closet, and I was saying stuff like, "Oh ha ha, so scary, nice demon impression," and stuff like that. I kept mocking it because I thought it was one of my brothers trying to scare me, and out of nowhere it got super cold, and my chest got super heavy, and the thing in the closet jumped out on all 4s and started hissing. I can't really describe the noise it was making, but it sounded something like a cougar screeching and a snake hissing at the same time, and it was very blood-curdling, and it makes me shiver to talk about it. Anyways, when this started to happen, I began to lose my breath as if it were sucking my soul out of my body, and then it just stopped and crawled back into the closet very contortedly, and I woke up. I was very calm when I woke up, but I had cold sweats, and I was very confused. I sat up on the couch and looked at my brother, who was sitting right next to me, and I told him the whole story, and he was silent for a good minute. My brother told me that he's had multiple dreams like that, and that my mom has too, and he said that he has always had a bad feeling when close to that room, and that he always woke up in the middle of the night thinking that he was being watched. Fast forward to a few months back, and my brother was moving out, and me and my other brother got stuck cleaning that room. I always got a bad feeling when my brother would leave me in there alone and the room was colder than the rest of the house. I haven't had a dream like this since, but then my other brother, whom I haven't spoken of yet, just had a dream similar to mine, and it made me think about it all over again. I have had dreams about ghosts before, and they're all very vivid, and I get the same feeling in all of them. I suspect that I have a demon following me, but I have no clue where it is from. I started to think I had the same demon as my brother and mom, but they have way worse nightmares, and theirs are way more vivid, and they see an actual demon, and not just a figure. The next day, after I had that nightmare, my brother bought sage and salt and started to spread it around his apartment. He also got holy water and put that out too, and drank some of it with me and my other brother. Ever since then, I haven't had a nightmare, but I have had some where I get the feeling that I felt when I had the first nightmare, but they usually go by really fast, and I typically just pray in my sleep, and it goes away. If anyone else has a story about their first experience with sleep paralysis, or simply just a vivid nightmare, feel free to share it. There's always going to be people that will have experienced what you have experienced. When I was about 12, I'm now 23, I lived in a relatively large, run-down house. I don't know much about its history, but I do know that it was built in 1936, based off of a newspaper that my family found in one of the walls during a renovation. I believe it had about 17 separate rooms, a fact that I was obsessed with when I first moved in. I just liked counting things. These rooms included 2 basements. One was right near the garage with an old door that went down to a concrete cellar where you could access some of the ducts to the house. And there was one within the house that held the laundry room and a storage room. My bedroom and the bedroom adjacent to mine both had crawl spaces going into the walls. 2 of which I covered with dressers. The house often gave me a sense of unease because of the sounds that it made due to it being old, combined with the fact that we couldn't afford heating it all winter, so there were blankets and plastic wrap in all of the windows, constantly making it very dark. Being alone in it was just scary for some reason. I could never shake the feeling of something looking over my shoulder when I was there alone, especially causing me to act like a fool and yell out at nothing while home alone sometimes. Honestly, I'm not sure what caused that, but I'm sure that it had to do with the level of darkness within the house, due to there being no natural lighting and my tiny adolescent brain conjuring up demons just because the house had been settling or something of that sort. One day, I was heading downstairs to do the laundry, and after I was done switching everything over and grabbing the laundry basket, my attention got caught by a large tank of some sort on one of the outer walls of the laundry room. I'm not sure what it held. It wasn't a water heater, but it may have been some sort of reservoir back in the day. It was very, very dusty, since no one ever went near it or touched it at all. Covering the tank this time were dozens of handprints, small to large, and also ones with much longer fingers than a normal hand. I'm not sure if it was due to dragging down, or the hands were just like that. It sent me into fight or flight immediately. I sprinted up the stairs and stayed up there for the rest of the day. It really bothered me trying to think of what could have caused the unnatural-looking, long-fingered handprints. I scared myself a lot thinking about it. Recently, I moved into a new apartment, and in the garage there are a few black handprints that I don't remember being there when we moved in. This could just be because I never noticed them, but I swear they were never there, and one day recently, they had just appeared. It brought back my memory of my old house and the fingerprints in the dust, hence my post here. It makes me a little uneasy, but not much else can be done about it, I'm sure. This event has stayed with me through the years, and I thought I would share it to see what others outside of my perspective think. I'm not really sure, though I have had many more experiences to do with that house in the following years of my life. This is from 2015, but I really remember it like it was yesterday. It happened in Yokosuka, Japan, while I was stationed there with the Navy. I was out during the day walking and exploring Tokyo, and when I finally went back to the base, I didn't want to return to the ship for the night, so I stayed at the Navy Lodge on base. It had an open floor plan, so the only doors were the front door and the door to the bathroom. I had just went to sleep when I woke up randomly and I had sleep paralysis and couldn't move. I could only move my eyes to look around the room. It was like something was holding my body to the bed. Then I saw and heard the front door open, and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. Then I saw and heard the front door open, and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. The door slowly closed, and then I saw a big shadow figure with white, glowing eyes move from the front door kitchen area on the right over to the living room on the left, slowly moving and keeping its eyes locked on me at all times. As it got around the corner to the living room, it stayed there for a few seconds before peeking its head around the corner and staring at me again before hiding back around the wall. I woke up and was able to move again, so I jumped out of bed and ran around the room, turning all the lights on, trying to find whatever it was, but nothing was there. I laid back on the bed and tried to fall asleep again, and almost as soon as I closed my eyes, it happened again. I couldn't move, and could only look around the room. The thing then moved from the left from the living room to the right again where the bathroom was, and continued to stare at me with its white, glowing eyes the whole way. It opened the door and triggered the motion light in the bathroom. The light had a creepy blue glow to it that I still remember vividly. As it disappeared behind the wall again, it once more peeked around the corner, staring at me with its white glowing eyes for another 5 to 10 seconds, before going back into the bathroom and closing the door behind itself. I woke up again and jumped out of bed and ran around the room looking for it, leaving the bathroom the last place that I would check. I could see the blue motion-activated light on in the bathroom from under the door. I finally threw the door open and went inside, throwing the lights on, and nothing was there. I went back to my bed, laying down again and trying to sleep, just hoping that I was imagining all of it. Then it happens again, but this time it feels like something is covering my mouth too. I can hardly breathe as I see the bathroom door open, letting the blue light seep into the rest of the room as it moves around the corner staring at me with its white glowing eyes, as this time it moves to the foot of my bed, standing there for a few seconds and then, almost as if it's extending its body, stretches all the way to where it's only a few inches away from my face, staring directly into my eyes with its own white, glowing ones. I'm trying to flail my arms and scream out at it to leave, when I'm finally able to get out a "fuck off" before it disappears right in front of me. This happened a couple of days ago. My family and I went to an old asylum while on vacation. They had renovated it and put a couple of stores and a restaurant inside, so my father thought it would be a nice place to visit. When we first drove into the driveway, I was overcome with dizziness, and I couldn't even finish the message that I had been typing while we were pulling in. As I got out of the car, the dizziness subsided for the most part, and we all went inside. It still looked like an asylum. The doors were big metal cage doors. The floor was old and cracked. The walls were old, yellowed bricks, and there were entrances that were covered over with more bricks so that no one could enter. As we began walking down the halls, I noticed that something was off. The overall feeling in the place was just terrible. I started getting a headache, but it was only minor. I know spirits can give people headaches and stomach aches, so I wasn't at all surprised. As I said, mine was minor, but I couldn't help but notice that my sister was getting worse and worse. There was an old metal-looking door that resembled something that would be on an animal cage. It was just a pitch-black, empty room on the other side. I had mentioned to my mother the feeling that I had about the place, and so as a joke, she held me close to the cage and said, "Look in there. Do you see a ghost yet?" As they were all laughing, I stood there in shock, because there was someone on the other side of the gate looking back at me. I ripped away from her grasp, and kept walking down the hall away from the cage-like door. My sister was giving me a look, so I knew that she wanted to tell me something. We went off to the side, and she told me that she had a terrible, pounding headache. We kept walking as she told me about it, but I could see that she was getting worse, like she didn't know where she was going anymore, so I took her outside the building for a minute to help her head, and told her to pray and imagine that there was a white light surrounding her. She did this, and started to walk away from the building as her headache was getting better. My father had scheduled for us to eat inside the building, and our table was ready, so we were forced to go back in. She told me that her headache was even worse than before, and that she was about to pass out, and that the praying in white light now made it worse instead of better. We were texting each other, and she was telling me that she felt a strong pressure on her back and head. Soon enough, I could see that she couldn't take it anymore, so I took her outside again. My parents were furious, but only because they didn't understand. Once I took her outside, she started crying and shaking, and so I took her away from the building, and we went for a walk. We went across the street, and I talked to her until her headache stopped, and so did the pressure. Our parents texted us telling us that the food was there, so once again we were forced to enter the building.
I held her hands and prayed with her before we entered again. We ate as fast as possible and got out of there even before our parents did. We drove off, but she still felt uneasy, and so did I. We got out of the car at our next destination, but it was almost as if we were still in the asylum. My sister started crying and shaking again, and she asked me if it could make it kill herself. I asked her why, and she told me that it was giving her suicidal thoughts and that it was making her depressed and draining her energy. I took her and my mom and dad, and we all prayed together over her. As I placed my hand on her head while praying, it was weird. I could feel it there still. It had followed us. It thought that she would be an easy target, and maybe she would have been, if I wasn't there. Maybe that's what scares me the most. I'm not sure if it's gone, but when we arrived back at the hotel, I saw and heard someone following me in the hall, so I thought it was my sister. But when I turned around, no one was there. But that could have just been a different spirit. I'm pretty used to them by now. Last night, my sister and I didn't sleep. We were kept awake the whole night through. Maybe we were scared, or maybe we were kept up by something else. Something dark. Something inhuman.
I am aware of sleep paralysis. I understand your brain can project things, etc. I'm not denying that. That is what possibly could have happened, but damn did it scare me, so I'm going to tell you. Now, I have had sleep paralysis a fair few times in my life, but this is the scariest thing that I have ever experienced during a sleep paralysis episode. One night, I woke up during a quite peaceful sleep. Across from my bed is the TV and, of course, a wall behind that TV. I opened my eyes and instantly noticed that I was in sleep paralysis. I worked on moving my fingers, but I heard something. It sounded like something floating, like ooh, ooh, ooh sound. Being on my stomach, I could see across my room, which was my TV. The wall behind that TV, I shit you not, was all of a sudden a window. I didn't see it change into a window. It was already a window when I looked at it. I start breathing heavily. The sound is getting closer, and the brightest light that I have ever seen shines into my room, but not enough for me to lose vision. A UFO just floats by my window. Meanwhile, I'm still telling myself to move and not freak out. It continues to pass, until I see it slowly backing up outside the window. I'm still trying to move. The UFO sits there. I try calling for my housemate, which of course doesn't work. I feel something malvoyant at the end of my bed. I see a tall, dark shadow. And as it reached out to grab or touch or whatever it planned to do, I shot up from my bed. Absolutely the most scared that I had ever been. I was breathing heavily, and when I did shoot up, the window became my wall again. There was no sound. Most of my sleep paralysis episodes, I don't usually remember falling asleep. But this night I didn't go back to sleep. The house my grandparents owned when I was younger had a lady in the basement. At least, that's what I called her. My older sister called her the lady on the landing, because she only ever saw her on the landing to the basement. Either way, basement. I haven't correlated any of my personal stories with my cousins or siblings except my own. My aunt used to live down there, and I haven't dared to ask her about it because she had an experience when she was younger where she was physically lifted out of the bed by her ankles, and because of that, you can't even mention ghosts or paranormal stuff because she covers her ears and walks away. But that's another story for another day. Anyways, my personal stories. I'll try to keep them short and sweet. The first time I can recall seeing her, I was hanging out with my aunt, a different aunt than the one mentioned above. She and her son were in the house while my mom was working and my grandparents were in Hawaii. Now, for some reason she chose to bathe me in the basement bathroom, which was weird because there was another fully functional bathroom with a bathtub on the second floor of the house, as well as the shower in my grandparents' room. My cousin was expecting his friends to come over and play. The doorbell rang, so my aunt ran up to answer it, but had my cousin stay with me. I was about 3 or 4 at the time, he was about 9, just to keep an eye on me. She called him up to go play with his friends, and as soon as he left the bathroom and was halfway up the stairs, the door slammed shut and the lights turned off. Then, all of a sudden, I see this woman literally in the mirror facing me, but it looked like she was getting ready to walk out of it because she was getting closer. I, of course, start screaming. My cousin is on the other side of the door desperately trying to get in. My aunt comes flying down the stairs and couldn't get the door to open either. She kept telling me to unlock it, but I was stuck, frozen in terror. Finally, she gets the door open and sees nothing. She flips the switch on and gets me out of the tub, and nothing else was really said about it. Later that week, I was again with my aunt as my mother was working. I asked if I could sleep in Grandma's bed since they weren't there, and at the time, at my little size, that bed seemed humongous. She called them in Hawaii to ask for their permission, and they said it was fine. So I'm asleep in their bed, and I'm not exactly positive if it was a dream or an actual experience that had taken place. I was in the center of the bed. From there, you could see straight into their bathroom on the right side of the room, and then straight down the hallway into the computer room. Mind you, this is on the second floor now, not the basement. In this maybe dream, the bathroom light flipped on and I could see her again coming out of the mirror. It was like I was locked in place, but I could see down the hall in the computer room my mom sitting at my grandma's computer. I tried to call her, but it came out as a dull whisper. I tried over and over, but the sound just wouldn't come out. The woman actually made it out of the mirror this time, and got just a step out of the bathroom when I was able to get unlocked, and I ran down the hallway into the room where my mother was. Again, I don't think anything was ever actually said about this. Another time, maybe 2 years later, my mom and I were sleeping in the basement bedroom, and the closet doors were those full floor-to-ceiling mirrors. I saw her again, but my mom was within reach, and I woke her up and she saw this woman too, and grabbed me and ran upstairs. I guess a more adequate name for her would be the lady in the mirror, but I've been calling her the lady in the basement for what seems like forever. I know for a fact that the cousin from the first story saw her on a number of occasions. My sister saw her, my brother saw her, and a couple of other cousins when they would visit from out of state. It really only affected us kids. Over the past couple of years, I've asked my mother if she remembers it. My sister, my aunt that would watch me, and then her son and everyone is pretty much on the same page of, this was real. My mother's theory is that she was a family member from the past that just stuck with the family, and she didn't mean to be scary, she just was, because we weren't used to seeing that sort of thing. I asked my grandpa about it last week over text if he recalls me ever saying anything to him about her, and he replied, no, and I'd prefer it if you didn't. Now, here's the kicker. My grandma passed in December of 2018. I had not seen the lady in the basement since that particular house. They moved houses, hell, even moved states, and I never saw her in any of the other houses. Not once. But after my grandma died, I saw her in the house that I was living in that wasn't even close to the original house where I first saw her. Now I'm wondering if my mom's theory on her being a relative that passed and just was attached to us is even true, and that when my grandma passed, she followed her, but made her rounds to say bye? Because right after I saw her at my own house, I called my sister immediately and she freaked out because she had seen her at her house the day before. I haven't seen her since, and I pray I don't see her again. Half of me wants to write a letter to the new owners of that house from my childhood and ask them if they have seen her as well. I went ghost hunting with a friend at Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany, New York. The whole operation of ghost hunting at this place is actually pretty interesting. They give you a quick tour and let you go around hunting on your own, allowing you to bring your own equipment, rent theirs, or sometimes borrow theirs. Now, there is a fairly large amount of people, but plenty of ground to cover, so it was rare to be bunched up too much. But we always kept in mind others when investigating on our own. Primarily, the equipment that I was using was pretty mundane. Flashlights, audio recording on a Samsung Galaxy S6, and a Nikon Coolpix. Rolling Hills used to be a poorhouse near Batavia, New York. It is located in pretty much the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but fields. Outside disturbances are minimal, which is great. The place is old, no doubt. Bugs get in, and field mice and rats are no doubt common. The grounds took in people with mental disabilities, the physically ill, the poor, and later it served as a senior living facility. There are a few famous resident spirits, but during our interactions we caught no evidence from those areas. We're very objective and scientific with our investigations, and for some reason do not get creeped out by much. I can safely tell you that we did not have any feelings of a presence or the like. Our first start was the shadow hallway. This hall is famous for shadow beings peeking out from the doors down the hall, as well as pushing people in wheelchairs, and your run-of-the-mill terrors. Additionally, the portal room was on this level. We experienced 3 events in this hall. 1. While not our experiment, a group of people had a flashlight that uses a twist motion to turn on. While barely having it on, they asked the spirits questions. The flashlight, much to my surprise, flashed with responses accurately. While this was not my flashlight, I am convinced that it was legitimate. I took several photos of the area and captured nothing of note. 2. A loud bang came from a bathroom nearby. My friend and I immediately went inside to investigate, taking photos. While we caught nothing, others nearby said that they had heard a bang from that room as well earlier. This could be explained by the building's age, but nevertheless, it was still interesting. 3. We thought we heard footsteps coming down the hall, but we did not record any sounds on the audio device, so I cannot say that this was 100% legitimate. The next location that we experienced an event in was a small building attached via tunnel to the main building. My friend, who is extremely skeptical, always brings this situation up when talking about the experience. We were standing in the building right in the middle. They say that there was a boy who liked to hear songs. So, as I was about to chime in my best pirate shanty, don't ask, we heard a knock on a large wooden door behind us. Okay, I know that you're probably thinking that someone was on the other side of that door. Well, that door is out in the field, and we were extremely quiet in that room. There was no window for someone in the next room to look through. The door was a large, sliding wooden door that was sealed. He thinks it was the best experience there. Shortly after the door knock, something made a noise almost like an object falling on the opposite side of the room. While my friend investigated the door, I investigated the noises across the room. There were no people anywhere near us at that time, but something could have fallen. The rest of the building was fairly tame, and I enjoyed the experience. I may go sometime again, but next time shell out the cash to make it a private event. I am far too worried about individuals ruining evidence, or worse, causing false positives. Last night was awfully weird. I was in my childhood home, but at my current age. As I opened the door to my grandmother's room, it suddenly swung back and forth while my hands were still holding it from the side, not the doorknob, and it pulled me forcefully into the room and onto the floor. I felt a cold sweat coming on, but suddenly realized that I had to toughen up and shake it off. I screamed something like, "This is my house! You have no right to scare me! How dare you!" over and over again. I came close to the door and would hear a faint, high-pitched, distorted, tee-hee kind of laugh. Then I woke up. I thought it was already around 6 a.m. because that's usually the time when my alarm goes off. As I grabbed my phone, I was surprised to see that the time was actually 3:07 a.m. I already felt partially awake, as anyone who wakes up at 6 a.m. would. Now I have to force myself back to sleep or I'll feel awful in the morning. I play some ambient sleep sounds from Alexa while I observe the room, anxiously expecting something out of the ordinary. But nothing happened. I fell back asleep, and in my next dream, I was at a hospital with a group of people that I don't know. But somewhere we were grouped together. There's about 5 or 6 of us in a room, with a dead person in the bed, covered with a sheet. As I left the room, I saw 2 more of the people in our group suddenly appear in a different room, somewhat helping each other put another dead body into a hospital bed while the family weeps. I went back to see the rest of the group in the original room, trying to position the dead body to sit up. The dead guy is of mixed Chinese descent, a bit overweight, and bald. Then some information came into my head that he used to own a restaurant or a bar. As they moved his torso upwards, they failed, and the dead body dropped onto the floor. This is when things start to get really weird, because the dead guy woke up like he was startled from his sleep. He stood up and started chasing us, accusing us of killing him. His bowels were a mess, and I could see a stab wound on his belly and on his lower back. I ran away in a long corridor and found myself in the nurse's changing room. It had open cubicles like the ones from football players' dressing rooms, with scrubs and casual clothes alike hanging on the wall. I was partially covered in the dead guy's bodily fluids, so I washed up. Then a nurse found me. I looked terrified of what happened, so I explained the situation to her and led her to that room. The nurse came in and started to comfort the dead guy. He began to calm down and sat beside the nurse, then closed his eyes. The nurse looked at me, and without talking, some information came into my mind. I learned that he was a hopeless case, so they just let him lie down until he dies, as he was already in the process of dying when we startled him. After that moment, I woke up, and this time it was truly 6 a.m., 6:30-ish already. I didn't feel any dread as you would in a nightmare. I did a bit of research on dream meanings, but I felt that it didn't fit with me. Then I found out the significance of 3:07 a.m. from the movie The Conjuring, so I thought the exact time was just a coincidence, since it's just a movie. I could not remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. It would be very, very rare that it's not worth remembering. But waking up at 3 a.m. with 2 weird dreams will definitely stay with me forever. I was raised in a house that had a few spirits in it. My family are all skeptics and would always find a way to explain things. A few experiences, and then I'll get to the main story. 1. Our house had 3 stories, with technically 3 master bathrooms, 1 on each floor. The one on the main floor we used as an office. I would constantly hear someone walking around in the office at night, sinks turning on, toilets flushing, and occasionally taking. My parents would always say that someone was awake and making those noises, and the toilet and water running was just faulty pipes. 2. There would always be a shadow figure that would pace on the top floor. There was a balcony that overlooked the foyer, and I would usually see who I presumed was a lady in a dress, pacing back and forth. My parents just said that it was the shadow of someone outside. We were on a hill, overlooking all of our neighbors. I don't know how they thought this was possible. 3. I hated using the upstairs bathroom, which was my bathroom. I would hear talking and singing from that bathroom. When no one was home and I was in there, someone would bang on the door. One time I was showering and listening to music. I heard the banging sound so loud that it shook the room, and then the locked door swung open, and I heard a scream. My parents said that my brother was pranking me, which is something that he never did. Anyways, on to the main event. My brother is about 10 years older than me. He was the only sibling living at home with me and my parents. He had the master bedroom in the basement. I was never really in the basement except for going to the garage because it was in the basement next to the bedroom. I always remember feeling uneasy down there, though. But I wanted a big room, so when my brother moved out, I begged my parents to let me have his room, and eventually they caved. I moved all my stuff downstairs, painted and everything. I loved it. I was talking to my brother about it one day, and he told me, "Watch out for the little girl who lives down there. She likes to laugh." I was shocked, as obviously he had to be kidding. My whole family besides me never talked about stuff like that. I just kinda giggled and shrugged it off. He was probably just trying to scare me. About a week after I moved into my new room, I had a friend come over. We were just laying on the floor next to the bathroom laughing when she had to go to the bathroom. She closed the door and I was just zoning out when all of a sudden she goes, "That's not funny." I asked her what she was talking about, as I hadn't done anything. She said that she heard someone laughing right outside the door, but I didn't do anything or hear anything. She left freaked out, and I assumed that my brother had put her up to it since she liked him. A few days later, I hear someone in my bedroom while I'm in the shower. I call out thinking it's my mom, but I don't hear a response. I get out, and as I'm putting on my robe, I hear a little girl's giggle, and then, "Are you looking for me?" I freak out. I throw open the door to my room, but no one is there. I checked the garage and ended up setting off the house alarm so no one could have come or gone through the doors without everyone knowing. I run upstairs, and my mom is pissed that I set off the alarm, and I tell her what just happened. She told me my brother had a similar story when we first moved in, but that it was nothing. I called my brother and asked him why he told me to watch out for the little girl. He said that I was the little girl. He was kidding because, quote-unquote, you would always come downstairs and giggle really creepy. I never did anything like that. I told him that, and he got creeped out. I still would occasionally hear the little girl. I never saw her, but she did like to laugh and open the bathroom and closet doors. I named her Sarah. My brother called me up today and asked me about this. He asked me if I was sure that I never tried to scare him by laughing, and I told him no. He got really uncomfortable. I don't think he knows how to handle the fact that our house is haunted. I grew up not far from Manteno State Hospital. It's an abandoned insane asylum in the far south Chicago suburbs. My dad would sometimes drive my family down there, and we'd circle around the property by car just for fun. When I turned 16, he bought me my own little beater car, and of course, I had to show this awesome place to my friends. By the time I was old enough to go exploring, many of the original buildings had been renovated and repurposed as businesses. Half of the property was converted into a local VA hospital, and a quarter of it was torn down and replaced with new housing. Only a handful of the original buildings remained, all clustered in the back corner of the campus. One summer day, I took friends A, B, and C to go check it out. We brought our cameras and went with the intent to go inside and explore it. We parked in a lot where other people parked to go to work in one of the other buildings to avoid suspicion, and walked about a quarter mile to the abandoned hall. As we walked up to this creepy old building, I felt sick to my stomach and full of dread. The main doors were chained shut, and most of the windows were boarded up. I remembered walking on the porchway and choosing my steps carefully because the windows were busted out and there was glass everywhere. The four of us finally came upon a window that was accessible enough to climb into.
Realizing that this was actually going to happen, I had a panic attack and couldn't go through with it. I was trembling and didn't want to be the scaredy cat, but I really couldn't do it. In fact, in just recounting that, I'm still scared. And this happened about 16 years ago already. Anyway, I handed my camera to friend A and told him to take the pictures. I was petrified and felt like I might puke at any given moment. Friend B and I walked back to the car in silence. I had a cigarette in the car while we waited for friends A and C to come back. My nerves calmed quickly enough. Friend B confessed that she was scared too, and was glad that I said something so that she didn't have to go in. Soon enough, our other two friends came running back at the car, full speed. We heard their footsteps pounding on the asphalt, and quickly unlocked the doors. I started the car up, and we were off in an instant. I assumed that the cops had arrived, so I sped off the campus and into town, hoping to blend into normal traffic. I asked them what had happened, and if the cops were called, and they said no. Both friends who had gone into the building said that they heard voices. Both of them said that they saw a hand curl around the frame of a big metal corridor door, and heard it slam shut with an impressive echo. Both of them testified that they heard someone crying, saying, "Where am I?" At some point, they got too frightened to continue and just decided to bolt. I was really spooked. Friend A, who had taken my camera, was eerily quiet. Friend C showed me that he had found a newspaper from 1979 on the floor, and he had taken it as a souvenir. I, being the more suspicious type, demanded that he get rid of it. I didn't want any potentially haunted objects in my car. So he tossed it out the window without too much coercing. It took us about 45 minutes to drive home, and since we were kinda shook, we decided to go to Denny's and rehash the experience. During the ride back, Friend A fell asleep. This didn't concern me much at the time, but became an important factor to remember later on. We got to Denny's, and friends B and C went in ahead. I woke up friend A and asked him what happened. Why did they run? He said, "We saw someone sitting at the end of a hallway, cross-legged, on the floor. It was a man and he was crying, kind of rocking back and forth." He also explained that he believes it was the entity who used his energy to manifest, and that was why he was feeling so drained and passed out so hard on the way back. We had a late dinner and I drove everyone home afterwards. After I dropped off my last friend and was going back to my house, I distinctly felt someone pressing their knees into the back of the driver's seat. It's a familiar feeling, especially if you take the bus in high school. Lots of people prop their knees up on the seat and the feeling is unmistakable. I yelped and sat up straight so that my back wasn't touching my chair and drove home faster. The very next day, I picked up my cousin to go see a movie together. She blurted out to me that she thought she had seen someone in my back seat. I was immediately horrified, as I hadn't confided in her the events from the night before. I asked her which seat, and she said, of course, behind the driver's seat. That night I had a dream about a man. He was Caucasian, mid-30s, brown hair, and partially bald. He had brown eyes. He was wearing a white cotton vest, which I found odd. I instinctively knew it was the ghost that my friends had seen in the hospital. In the dream, he was guiding me through a series of booby traps. He was holding me by the elbow and walking with me. He seemed sweet and harmless. I thought maybe he's a guardian or something. These dreams continued for about a week straight. Friends who didn't know about our trip to the asylum started to have experiences in my car. One friend heard and felt someone whisper in her ear. Another had her elbow grabbed by someone in the back seat. I felt the knees in my back on many occasions. In fact, I started to anticipate it and often drove without my back touching the seat at all. One time I felt like someone was shaking my seat while I was driving. Like hands on either side of the chair and just violently shaking it. When the experiences and the dreams didn't stop, I grew afraid. I didn't feel like he was a guardian anymore. Finally, after about a week and a half of this, I sat down with friend A again. I asked him, "Do you remember what he looked like?" He said all I could see was that he was balding and he was wearing a white vest. I don't know how, but I think his name was David. I told my parents about what happened after that. They suggested that I tell David that he wasn't allowed to follow me anymore. To tell him to go to the light or whatever. At this point, I was ready to do anything because I was on edge and spooked all the time. I prayed every time I came into the house that he wouldn't follow me in. I was afraid to go out with my friends. I was afraid to go to sleep sometimes. So, 2 weeks after our initial venture into the asylum, I went back with friend A. We went during the daytime and idled in front of the building. I said aloud, "You don't belong here with me. You need to go home," or something along those lines. I prayed a lot. I didn't want him anymore. I felt bad, but I needed him to stay there. We parked and just kind of sat there quietly for a while. I think friend A and I were just saying goodbye, severing ties, I don't know, but it felt sad. While we were parked, I did hear doors slamming inside the building. At one point, I heard someone laughing as well. I envisioned him leaving me in my car. I told him that he could never follow me again, that he needed to go, and to move on. We left the hospital that day and didn't go back for many years. I never dreamt of him again. I've never told anyone the full story for 2 reasons. 1 being that it sounds totally ridiculous, and 2, because I'm afraid, and that thinking about him too much will send some sort of psychic beacon out to attract him or other spirits back to me, when that's totally the opposite of what I want.
For context, I don't normally have a problem with sleep paralysis, and actually had to look it up to see if that's what I experienced. This past Saturday evening, my wife and son went to her mom's to use the pool and ended up staying late. I was home alone. I did some chores and ended up downstairs with the AC on and watching TV. I wasn't physically tired from chores, which was putting a load to wash, taking out trash, and cleaning up the kitchen counter. The next thing I know, I am deep asleep, although I'm mentally awake. I try to move my body and cannot. I can think like I'm awake, and I can hear myself groaning. I can see my room, and I'm lying on my sofa. It's dark outside, and I have the overwhelming feeling that there is someone in the room with me. I'm struggling to wake myself, and I can't. I know I'm laying on the sofa. I can hear the TV. I have consciousness of my surroundings, yet can't shake myself awake or move my body. I have this terrible feeling that there is someone on the other side of the room. My den is very long, with a family room attached to it, but I can't move my body to see who is there. I get the feeling like if I don't move, something bad is going to happen. I'm eventually able to shake myself awake and have movement of my body again, yet the room seemed brighter, like if it wasn't as dark as when I was trying to move myself awake. I don't see anyone there with me. The TV is still on, and I know that it was the same program that I heard in my paralysis state. The second episode happened last night. My son was in our bed, so I went to his room to lay down as I got tired of him taking over the bed. I was watching YouTube, the lights were off, the bedroom window was open. I somehow passed out without even realizing that I had fallen asleep, and had another episode of sleep paralysis. I'm lying there. I can hear the fan and the iPad playing a commercial between videos. Again, I get a sense of foreboding. Someone is at the window, then something moved in the room. I think the closet door creaked. I'm trying to shake my body to move, and I can feel my heart pounding. I eventually make my leg move off the side of the bed, and I must be making grunting noises, and trying to move my foot to touch the floor. Then I'm able to turn over, and I sit up. I haven't had a lot of experiences with this before, and it almost felt like something else was controlling it. Not like drugs, as I don't do drugs, nor alcohol, as I haven't had a drink in weeks. It was almost like hypnotism or something controlling me to fall asleep so quickly and so deeply. I'm a 14-year-old girl, but when I moved into this house, I had just turned 12. The house was fine, and was very quiet since before this I had lived with a ton of family, but now there were only 4 of us. We moved in the day after Thanksgiving, and it felt great to have my own room that I didn't have to share with any cousins or siblings, so I spent a lot of time up there basking in my newfound alone space. Let me emphasize this. When we moved in, I felt nothing. No presence, no spirits, nothing paranormal, nothing off. That is, until December rolled around. The first week of December is when I felt it for the first time, like I was being watched by something. Like when someone stares at you in public, and you have that instinct to look at them, that's how it felt. I always felt watched in my room, to the point that I hated being alone up there, and spent all my time in the living room or in my parents' or brother's room. The first week goes by, and I try to ignore the feeling. I chalked it up to me being paranoid because it was a new house, but still, the thoughts stayed in the back of my mind. Finally, I told someone who may have answers for me, my aunt. She's my mom's sister, and she has always believed in the paranormal for as long as I can remember. She got me into it for a while before I stopped believing. I believe again now, because this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. She explained that it was probably a nice spirit watching over the house and, hopefully, me. I hoped that was the case, and in a way, it was. Over time, I would feel it any time I entered my room, and especially when I was trying to fall asleep. It creeped me out so much, and I just wished that it would go away. Then it went from watching me to making contact. One night I was home alone because my brother and parents were visiting Santa, and I didn't want to go that year because I felt sick. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when I felt breathing on the back of my neck. It was hot and made my hair stand up. I froze in fear and stood there until the microwave went off. When it began to beep, the breathing faded away as if whatever were there had just walked off. I made the hot chocolate and sat on the couch. I was so freaked out that I was just there staring at the TV in shock until my family got home. Worst part is that I could still feel something staring at me, and this time, it wasn't in my room. Finally, the week of Christmas came, and the excitement made me forget about the incident prior until it happened again. Me and my mom were hanging out in the kitchen when she turned around to answer a question that my brother had asked her. I felt the hot breathing on my neck, and this time it stayed there longer. I froze again, unsure of what to do. I panicked and got up and went over by my mom, who was very confused. After that, I felt the breathing constantly, even on Christmas while opening gifts. It lingered. I finally got fed up one day while sitting in my room. It became less scary and more annoying. I said something along the lines of, "Stop breathing on me," and it stopped completely, and I was shocked. I didn't think it would actually work. After that, I began to have the same dream, but slightly different, every single night. It would begin with me at some park that I've never seen in my life, and me and this boy sat on a bench together. We would begin to talk, and it was actually quite peaceful. We would just converse and stare around at the people walking by. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and was really tall compared to me. I'm about 5'4", and he was like 6 feet. The dream would end, and I would never remember anything we talked about, just that it was a good dream. Flash forward to right after Christmas break, a friend, let's call her Danielle, came over to spend the night. We both heavily believed in the paranormal, and she decided because of this whole watching and breathing thing that she would bring her Ouija board. I had always heard different things about them, but decided it was worth a try. We began talking to the thing that watched me, and the reason I knew this is because it always had this very specific energy. I knew it because, like I've said this whole time, he was up my butt. We first asked what his name was, and he replied, Nolan. I was pretty shocked that the board actually worked, and I was pretty mesmerized. I then asked if he was the boy that I talked to in my dreams, and again, he said yes. I was pretty happy that he was nice, because before, I was quite terrified that he was a demon that wanted to eat my bones, but was relieved when it was just a 15-year-old boy. He then said he doesn't like summer and prefers winter, which explains the only appearance being during winter months. Cut to next December, the watching and breathing had stopped during March through November until it began again, only this time, stronger. He began screwing with me. He would open cupboards that I had just closed, or move things that I put in specific areas, only to find them in strange places far from their original area. I always knew that this was Nolan, who I had begun to call Noel. Time went on and the dreams became more vivid, and I remembered the conversations that we had, and it was still nice. Nolan became a good friend, even though I couldn't see him. That December came and went, and now we cut to this year. This is where I wish that Nolan never existed. So because of financial issues and other problems, my dad's family had to move in, my grandparents, aunt, and cousin. And me and that cousin were never super close. I'll call him Connor. Connor was super annoying. He always made messes that he never cleaned up. He never did chores, never did or went to school, and would do stupid stuff for attention, yet he always got what he wanted. By now, I'm 14 and Connor is 12. December rolls around and I'm excited to talk to Nolan. Me and Danielle are still friends and do weekend Ouija sessions with him. So we're home alone, me, Connor, and Danielle, and we decide to introduce Connor to Nolan. So we set up the candles and everything and begin. Things are going smoothly, until Connor starts calling Nolan names. He was saying some pretty mean stuff too. Me and Danielle were trying to get him to stop, but nothing was working until Nolan got really, really mad. Doors began slamming open and shut. Cupboards were going nuts. Our TV was flickering channels, and the windows sounded like someone was beating on them. Finally, I looked into the doorway to the hall, where everyone's rooms were besides mine, and there was a tall figure standing there, not moving, as everything went haywire. I screamed and said goodbye, standing up. Danielle was yelling for Nolan to stop, and Connor had begun to cry. Finally, I screamed for him to stop, that he was scaring me, and the figure disappeared, and the cupboards shut along with the doors. The banging stopped, and I just sat on the floor sobbing. Danielle wasn't crying, but I was terrified and just stood there silently. Connor didn't say anything either, but continued staring at the floor with tears in his eyes. Finally, our parents got home, and me and Danielle went to my room while Connor went back to the basement where he stayed with my aunt and grandpa. Danielle had fallen asleep, but I couldn't, so I began talking out loud as I felt Nolan was in the room. I started saying how it wasn't okay that he had really scared me, and I felt the breathing on my neck. Finally, I fell asleep, and things were fine. I dreamt about him again, and all was normal. About a week after that, Connor wanted to talk to Nolan again. Apparently, Nolan was giving him nightmares. Ones where he was chasing him throughout our house, trying to kill him. Nolan would scream about how Connor needed to leave me alone and stop bothering me, or he would kill him. Connor was obviously terrified, and wanted to say sorry, I guess. I'm not sure, but me and him sat down with Danielle's board, which she had left the week prior, and we began to talk with him. Nolan kept spelling out things like murder, angry, and my name over and over again. Our candles went out and knocking began on the window behind me. It went very slow at first, just a simple knock, knock, knock. Me and Connor froze. I couldn't move and I didn't want to turn around. Finally, I told Nolan that I was scared and that he needed to leave Connor alone and stop. The knocking stopped, and the board spelled out, sorry, then, Connor bad. After that, Connor decided to call it quits and go to bed. I decided to go into my room and try to talk to Nolan again. I started by being nice and asking him to knock once for yes, two for no, something that we usually did. But he got angry fast. He started to bang on my walls at the mention of Connor. My lights went out, and so did my TV. The banging was loud, and if I'm honest, it was terrifying. He was throwing my pillows and banging on my windows, like the night that Danielle was here. I was crying so hard that I could barely breathe and was hyperventilating and sobbing so hard that I could barely talk. Nolan stopped after I let out a strangled cry for him to leave me alone. After that, he stayed away, for a day at least. The next day I woke up, and the Ouija board sat in the middle of my room. I kicked it hard and walked downstairs. I was eating at the kitchen table talking to Connor about the night before. He said he had another dream about Nolan, except it wasn't a nightmare. It was exactly like mine in the park. They talked. I'm still confused about why Nolan would do this. I felt breathing on my neck while eating and basically told Nolan to screw off. I was still mad at him from last night. He did pretty quickly. I didn't feel him for a while, until last night, when Danielle came over for a sleepover and I decided to talk to Nolan. He obviously wanted to talk, so he sat up in my room, and he came through faster than I've ever seen. Now what happened next is what I really need some answers for. We began talking and he spelt out sorry, but then he did something I've never seen him do. He spelt out love, and I honestly don't know what that means. He would emphasize it, and barely answer any questions after that. Danielle then made the mistake of bringing up Connor. Nolan got pretty mad and started to bang on the walls again. I yelled at him to stop, and he did. I didn't say anything after that. Today I called my aunt for advice. She said he may just be an overprotective spirit, but I'm not sure if that's the case here. I don't know if Nolan is bad or not. He isn't to me, but he is to Connor and sometimes even Danielle, but never to me. All I know is that I won't be talking to Nolan for a while, a really long while. And even now, while typing this out, I can feel his breath on the back of my neck. I bought a replica of Ivan the Terrible and his son, an old piece of macabre art from Russia back in the day, and hung it up on my wall in a huge portrait behind me yesterday. It's a rumor or popular belief that the painting is cursed, and I've always been a fan of strange items and collectibles, so that's why I bought it. As I went to sleep last night, I was stricken with nightmares. Terrible nightmares. I dreamt I was in a camper with a friend and we sat down to watch a movie called Pendulum. It was a knockoff of Hellraiser. We began watching it and the computer screen just shut off and we couldn't get it to turn back on, so we had a collective "fuck it" moment and I exited the camper to go back inside to the house whilst my dream friend stayed in the camper. As I came back out, still during the dream night, with a drink, I noticed blood splattered on the windows and rushed inside. My friend had been beaten to death, and Pendulum was pulling himself through the computer screen. After this, I woke up, and by that I mean I came to a real-world setting where I was asleep on my couch last night. I attempted to get up and get some water, as I was thirsting after such a nightmare. I made it to the kitchen, cracked it open, and let it hit my lips, and then suddenly, I was on the couch again. In my mind at that moment, I considered that I had actually woken up. I sat up and walked into the kitchen again, cracked open that same water, when suddenly the refrigerator opened beside me, and I knew I was dreaming then. I woke up on the couch again, real as day, except it wasn't, as I went to drink that water again, and woke up on the couch again. After this is where it really started to get frightening. I considered that I was stuck in a loop, except this time I went to get up for water and walked past that area with the painting, and noticed that it was gone. This let me know I was still dreaming, and that I had another false awakening. I woke up for the water once more and started across the living room when I looked to an open doorway that I hang colorful beads from, and in the dark room veiled by the hanging threads was pendulum. That woke me again. This time I ran to the window and looked out to see cops rushing down my small street to the neighbor's house. My neighbor shot and killed her husband in the front yard 2 weeks ago, and that woke me up again. After waking up a few more times for water, I tried to go outside after another loop, except when I opened the front door, it was pitch black. Then car lights turned on and sped toward me. As I was about to get smacked with someone's F-150, I woke up again. At this point, I stopped trying to go anywhere and just kept trying over and over and over to slap myself truly awake. After looping for another 30 times or so, I eventually actually woke up and was relieved. I got that fucking water and downed it in one go. I am a 26-year-old female who has been having constant dreams where someone grabs me by my ribs and their fingers sink into my body. They're pushing and pushing their hands into my ribs and I'm crying out for it to stop, and it hurts for real. A crushing pain makes me want to curl up and beg for it to stop. It's the real deal. In one specific scenario, in a dream, I gasp and sit up in my bed. This is the dream, remember, so a lucid dream, if you will. I sit up in my bed, and I am scared of my room. I grab the blanket closest to me and realize that it's at that stage of early morning where the sun will be coming up soon, but hasn't quite just yet. I feel this terror for some reason, and then a man suddenly comes into my room. He's in a long, blank t-shirt. He's bald and scary with bloodshot eyes, and he's pale and just... He looks at me instantly and rasps, "Don't think I haven't forgotten what you owe me." I swear, I can never unhear this. And then he jumps on me and instantly starts to dig his fingers into my ribs. I can't even explain how bad it hurts and how it can feel so real. I'm wincing, I'm trying to shrink into myself, make the pain stop. It's so bad I can barely even beg to stop it, but nothing stops it. Until I finally wake up. I sat up in bed and prayed that it wasn't going to happen again, and just turned on the light. The sun was coming up anyhow, and I didn't want to be in bed anymore. Of course, I was slightly anxious about turning the bedroom door corner in case that thing was real. Anyway, I have a lot of sleep paralysis issues, but this was the first of these pain in the ribs dreams. Now I have a few from time to time. Just the other night, I was in a prison and someone attacked me and jabbed my ribs, holding on to me tight and just repeatedly jabbing and holding my ribs hard as I was praying for it to stop and begging for them to stop and crying. I don't know what it means. Also, I'm totally healthy, with no pain in my ribs or anything like that in daily life. Am I being attacked by a spirit? Is this really something?
This happened in January of 2016 when I was in my late teens. This story keeps coming up amongst my friend group, and something about it kind of bugs me. I have no clue what I really saw. I just know that it seemed paranormal and not anything that could be explained. I live about 2 hours away from an abandoned campus that was used as both a tuberculosis hospital and an asylum until the 1990s. I didn't really research it, nor did I believe in the paranormal at the time. I just thought that it would be so cool to go to an abandoned place. So I brought my 2 guy friends with me, one my age who was into the paranormal and had been there before, and one who was older than us, and my one friend that was a girl. I'm also a girl. It's one of those places that you'd get in trouble for trespassing at, so we hid my car and snuck in through a broken fence. I should mention that we went at around 8 or 9 p.m., so it was really dark out already. We go into the main building and are fine. We're not feeling anything weird, nothing like that. We exit that building and go into another that's maybe 2 buildings away, but within a couple of minutes we end up at the exact place where we exited the first building, the main entrance, and that felt a little off. We decided to venture into the basement. My girlfriend and I felt uneasy immediately and suggested that we go back upstairs instead, which we did. We go up into the place where they kept children. This was evident because of all the children's toys on the ground, and there was a soundproof room. Some of the toys were moving, and there was a ball that was bouncing on its own. Our friend who's been there before stopped us while we were walking through a hallway. We heard a door slam, followed by footsteps in front of us. The hallway in front of us was also pitch black, while the rear of the hall was at least lit up a little bit by the moon. We turned around and went back. Against our better judgment, we let the boys bring us into the basement. As soon as my girlfriend stepped her foot onto the basement floor, her flashlight went out, and we couldn't get it back on for the life of us. It did end up coming back on later, but that didn't happen until we had already left the premises. Anyway, my phone that was at 80% immediately died. We were standing in the center of the room together, and around us, it was almost like a haze was there. I felt so sick and lightheaded. I had a dread in the pit of my stomach, and so did my friends. We felt like we were surrounded by other people. We quickly went back upstairs. This is when it gets extremely unsettling. We go into the ballroom and grab a table. We sit on it, each of us on an end. It was square. We heard a door slam shut, so I look up at the ceiling to avoid looking around the room. My friend who's into the paranormal starts trying to communicate with whatever was in there with us. He said, "Knock once if you're a boy and twice if you're a girl." And we heard 1 knock. As this was happening, I see a black figure that's almost human-looking sitting in the windowsill. It's kind of hunched over and very tall. Its leg is swinging, and then it takes off. It's crawling across the ceiling. I tug on my other guy friend's arm, and he shakes his head as to not acknowledge it, and I try to forget it. My girlfriend says out loud, "Do you guys see?" But my guy friend, who is ignoring it, cut her off and said, "Stop." My guy friend, who is trying to communicate with this thing, told it to come and sit down. We felt the air get freezing, and that's when he said, "We have to go. Goodbye. You're not allowed to follow us out." We all jumped up off the table and walked out. After we were out, we practically ran to the car and left as quickly as we could. As soon as I was in the car, I felt so much better physically. We were silent for a while, but then my friend who is ignoring the figure said, "Did you guys see that?" And of course we all said yes, and shared our experiences. He thanked my girlfriend and I for getting the message about ignoring it as much as possible. It still scares me to think about it to this day, and I always get chills when writing or talking about it. The amount of energy needed to manifest that is what boggles my mind the most. I'm not even completely sure what we saw, and as much as we discuss it, we cannot come to a solid conclusion.
This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail that I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to set up my tent. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, kind of dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of its misery. I think nothing of it after that, and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that even in my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep, so I pull out a book that I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by and I hear the sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal walk/drag across the clearing toward my tent. It was really loud at this point, and now it sounds as if the hooves are being really heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along behind it. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops, and I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What on earth? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. There was just crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods, and I tried to not let it bother me. Besides, I did have my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, followed by women's laughter and sticks snapping off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing or just a product of being half asleep. Then I hear more faint laughing from a couple other different directions, all sounding like different people, and confirm that this is real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire off a warning shot into the air in case they come too close. Something about this laughter, how far in the woods that I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night, told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, seeing nothing. I listened intently to my surroundings. There was no more laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. I relaxed just a bit, and figuring that I had scared whoever off, I sat down, and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I woke up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering, not very far from my tent. Alert, I grab my rifle again and listen to what they were saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I call out again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people that were just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise, back to my truck with my head over my shoulder the entire way. I never heard anyone follow me. I never saw anyone or anything the entire time, but couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me. I left all my gear in the woods that night. The dream I just had was one of the most prophetic that I have ever had. I have gotten into the habit of listening to historical documentaries while I sleep, and one of them just made its way into my dream. Let me explain. I was sitting on a bed in a broken-down old house when I started hearing an animal screaming in pain outside. I run to the window, and I see an older man, and who I can only assume is his wife outside this house, with a strongly malnourished panther that is on the ground in front of them. The older man has a whip, and is raising it up before I yell to stop, and the panther jumps up, climbs up the side of the wall to my window, and the large jungle cat climbs inside. I start to close the window, and the man starts to scream to give me his animal back to him. I only flip him the bird, and then turn to help the animal. I leave to go get some meat and a bed and whatever else I think the animal might need when I get back. It's nighttime. I walk back in, and I see the panther laying with his head on my pillow, asleep. I turn around to put the stuff down and close the door, and when I turn back, he's sitting up, staring at me. I apologize to him for waking him up, and I show him the meat. I tell him that I don't want him chewing on me next time he gets hungry, and he says, I couldn't. At this point, I'm completely caught off guard, and I just stare at him. He continued, You saved me. I would never eat you. My name is Ramses. I smile at him and introduce myself while placing the meat in front of him. As he finishes up, he looks up at me and says, Thank you. I wish I could be here on happier terms, but I have a message about this world and all of its humans. This world will have to face judgment in an endless desert. So much was given, and so much was ruined. Now there will be nothing. I'm sorry. I let him know that I understood, and I thank him for his message. Suddenly, the house around me begins to shake and crumble. Just before a large piece of wall falls on me, I wake up. I live in the basement of my parents-in-law's house, and my wife never goes down to my room. I'm almost always in there alone. Since I've lived there, a few things have been happening that I dismissed as ventilation or something or other, such as my door slowly creeping open. Frankly, I wouldn't even have noticed something opening if it weren't for the green indicator light of something I have plugged into the wall outside my room. At night, if I have to leave my room, I exit and make an immediate left and dip into the bathroom. I can almost always sense an entity in the living area or bar area of the basement. This feeling is compounded when I exit the bathroom and my reflection appears on the wall of our sliding doors. Sometimes, I do not have a face in my reflection. I quickly re-enter my bedroom and shut and lock the door. Some nights there's a knocking from within my mattress that wakes me up, usually between 3 and 3:15 a.m. I have no way of dealing with this other than risking it and fleeing upstairs to my son's room. My son, 3, has autism and frequently says, "That's scary," over and over in the basement while looking toward the bathroom and living areas. The light switches that I have access to when leaving the room frequently cease to function right when I need them, or will flicker out almost violently as I'm on the staircase halfway up and out of the basement. I can hear rustling in the middle of the night sometimes as well, and I occasionally convince myself that it's just a mouse. Lately, this has graduated to the sound of footsteps in the ceiling in the middle of the night. Most recently, when I heard these footsteps, there was no one home but me, and I searched the house wielding a knife for an intruder to find no one home. I think that this entity is aware that I know it exists, and I interacted with it via the mirror once, and it contorted my face. I live in Massachusetts, and there's a location out here called Belchertown State School for the Feeble-Minded. Check it out on Wikipedia and Google some pictures. It's pretty neat stuff. Well, it has a very dark history, with ill treatment of patients including children and reported suicides. Closed in 1992. It was mostly demolished in late 2016 into 2017, but before that, I spent about a year going there on a weekly basis, usually Fridays. I began with a few friends, and then over time, I would go there alone. I spent a lot of time on those grounds to the point where I knew every part of it, inside and out. I even became something of a local legend because I wore a mask when exploring, and if I ran into other groups, they would recognize me from stories. There's a few selfies out there of me with some folks, too. People like taking pictures. Never saw any of those selfies, though, sadly. But there were many nights when I had the whole grounds to myself. Paranormal activity was rampant, and I have some crazy stories. The most obvious and frequent one was the noises. Now, mind you, the whole of the complex was in disrepair. Not only that, but wild animals would sometimes move in and out of the location, so there were a lot of unidentified noises that I could likely attribute to animals. I'm a firm believer in the paranormal, but I do try to approach all things as a skeptic before jumping to potential conclusions. A few things I absolutely could not explain. One was the X door. There was one door in the hospital, on the 3rd floor, right wing, second door into the floor, on the left. It was beside what once was a bathroom. This door led to a hall containing several empty rooms, and I could not determine what these rooms might have been. They didn't look like cells, more like office or storage spaces. I'm a pretty stocky 6-foot dude, and I had to lean into this door. I call it the X door because it was the only door in the whole facility marked with a spray-painted orange X on it. Imaginative name, I know. This door was a highlight for my personal trips as well as when I went with groups. 'Cause we would close the door, walk away, and later come back to find it open. It's possible that some animal managed to open it, as unlikely as that is. What was more unlikely were the times we left it open, and when we came back about 10 minutes later, it was closed. I tried when alone to sit and watch the door, but nothing happened. I tried to replicate potential causes, but there was zero airflow in this wing due to heavy doors on all the other sides, and honestly, if an animal did get in, it could not have been bigger than a rat due to there being so little open space to move in this particular segment. I could never explain the X door, but it's always a good stun when I bring a group back up to that floor and we would find the door had shifted. Another experience was one time when I was bringing 2 of my friends out there. It was their first trip to the grounds. We made it in past the fence and to the outside of the asylum. They didn't want to go in, already getting spooked. I encouraged them to try it. It had some cool stuff to see after all. Then we all 3 at the same time heard what sounded like screaming, laughter, and talking all at once. I heard more laughter, but my friends said that the screaming was most prominent. Now it could have been another group inside the hospital building, but here's the thing. I have been on the grounds when another group is talking or laughing or screaming inside. You can pinpoint exactly where it goes down. There was lots of broken windows and open walls, so it was pretty damn easy to lock down any sound and where it was coming from. But this sound came from the building.
That's the only way I can explain it. Like the whole building at once just let loose a scream of trapped noises. I'm a gutsy bloke, but I got chills. We left after that, to the begging of my friends to flee the grounds. I wish I could have stayed that night. The activity was just getting started, I feel. I would go there weekly and spend about a half hour in several key rooms. The padded room, the silent room, the X room, the auditorium, and gym. There were lots of great sounds and some truly disturbing sensations.
This is the only time I have ever had a threatening contact or experience. In June of 2019, me and a friend had decided to go with our girlfriends on a camping trip. It's the day of, and we're packing all of our things into the car. We finally get everything loaded and get into the car and put the address in the GPS. We set off, and after 3 hours of driving and 45 minutes of hearing my friend and his girl argue, we finally arrive. We get out of the car, and me and my friend begin to unload. After getting my stuff, I begin to gather my girlfriend's things. As I was, my friend was asking his girlfriend why she needed 3 bags for a one-night camping trip. She smiled and opened one of them, which contained an ounce of pot and other paraphernalia. The other 2 bags had her favorite snacks and clothes. Now knowing that we had weed, we had to find a place to camp that wasn't near any other people. It took until sundown, but we discovered the perfect spot. We decided that after we got everything taken care of, we would eat hot dogs and smoke. We started to build a campfire to light the area so that we could set up our tents, but ran out of wood immediately. I said that I would go get some while my friend stayed with the girls. I set off on my journey, and after about 2 minutes I find some sticks to use. I start picking them up, and all of a sudden, I felt someone grab my wrist. I looked up to see a very pale, strange-looking man wearing a blank expression. For a man, he also had surprisingly long fingernails. He was digging them into my wrist while trying to grab my other wrist. I turned my head to not see his face and screamed for help, and my friends shouted a response, saying that they were coming. After they shouted, I immediately felt relief in my wrist. I wasn't struggling to keep my arms down, so I turned and ran as fast as I could, horrified. I met up with my friends and said that we had to leave immediately. I didn't even bother to explain myself. I just wanted gone. We loaded back up and took the long walk back. We get to the car and load our bags into it. I explained what happened as we were walking back, and it scared them enough to make them want to hustle. I had a picture of my wrist right after, but my iPhone broke and my cloud wasn't backed up, so I lost it. I do have a picture of it now, though. It has since then become a scar, which shows just how much force he was using. It was absolutely terrifying. I'm an atheist, not very superstitious, but my family are big believers and have always claimed that our house was haunted. So about 2 hours ago, I fell asleep in the guest bedroom. Everyone avoids that room, but I like the ambience, so I've been spending a lot of time in there lately. I should probably note that there's a mirror by the bed. So first, I thought my mom walked in, and I remember saying, "Get out!" I know I heard the door open. I just asked her if she went in, and she didn't even know that I was taking a nap. Then, as I was sleeping, I heard whispering and scratching sounds. I started remembering things that never happened, and I could envision a lady with black hair sitting on the couch in the room. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there, so I tried waking up. The dream was so vivid that I thought I did wake up. I looked around the room, and written in red everywhere was murder, death, etc. There were also red tally marks all over the walls. There was a doll on the floor, a life-sized cloth one, and that's when I knew I was still dreaming. Suddenly I look over to the couch, and there she is. It was the lady with black hair. I tried waking up, but at this point I was experiencing sleep paralysis and I couldn't open my eyes. Finally, I woke up for real and ran out of that room. I don't ever want to go back. Anyone have any ideas on what happened? Am I overreacting? Edit. Okay, I'm getting freaked out now. I just woke up. It's 5 a.m. to another dream. This time I was in a normal world and felt like I was being watched. I kept telling everyone, but they wouldn't believe me until I fell asleep in the dream. Something or someone pulled the blankets up and laid down next to me. I'm not joking. Someone please help. I don't know what's going on. I had a gut feeling that it was that thing again. I woke up and had to call my mom to come in. This is getting weird. For someone who doesn't believe in God, I want to call an exorcist. Just for backstory, I'm an 18-year-old college student, but I live at home with my mom and my younger sisters, who live at my dad's half of the time, because my university is in my city. We also have our dog Kiefer and our cat Boots. My cat, Princess, died of a severe fungal infection about a month ago, and I feel like some of this might be tied to her passing. A little over 2 weeks ago, I hung out with my friend Z for the first time since the COVID situation, due to the fact that we went to the same university and once it had shut down, he moved about an hour or so south of my city to live with his girlfriend since he couldn't live in the dorms. Z and his girlfriend picked me up and took me to their apartment, talking about how they've been to an abandoned asylum a few times over the past couple months. They lived with his girlfriend's older brother, who has issues of his own, both drug-related and just general anger issues. A notable moment that they mentioned to me as they were taking me to their apartment was that one of the times the three of them went there together, her brother acted very strangely. He sat in one of the chairs that was left behind, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he was knocking glass out with his elbows and getting deep cuts, but didn't seem fazed. His anger also apparently peaked, and he was threatening to cut Z and his girlfriend if they didn't leave. As they left, they saw shadows moving everywhere, and her brother was talking to himself. Over the passing days, her brother would talk about demons and would yell about wanting to go back there. He broke into the room Z and his girlfriend slept in when it was locked. He was dragging a knife along the walls, growling, and would scream about these demons. When Z was telling me this, I could tell he was being serious. He looked scared to even tell the story. When they went back, her brother was screaming and sat back in the chair and muttered to himself, and after that everything went back to normal. He stopped talking about the demons, they stopped seeing shadow people, and the bizarre behavior ceased. This could have been tied to the drugs that he was on, but they felt the need to say this because they were also seeing shadows, and they were not high. When we got to their apartment, there were other friends of theirs, as well as her brother, inside. I didn't recognize any of them, so I sat and made small talk with all of them, and the atmosphere was generally calm aside from the blasting rock music and a couple of guys playing GTA V on high volume. A little while after I get there and we're all talking, one of the boys asked when we were going to the asylum. Her brother, who I guess we'll call M from now on, said that we were leaving around 11 p.m. since it was an hour-long drive to get there. We had a few hours of time to kill, so someone came and brought us McDonald's, and we talked and stuff until we had to leave in 2 cars due to us having a group of 9 people total. Z drove the car that I was in, and his girlfriend C drove in the car ahead of us. The atmosphere got tense quickly, because only about 10 minutes into our drive on the highway, C almost got into an accident. We watched her speed up to pass a semi, and she had hit a bunch of cones, and we couldn't find her car, which had a total of 5 people in it, for about 20 minutes, which was strange, because there were hardly any cars on the road at this time of night, and the car was easy to identify from the back lights alone. Eventually, we parked across the street from this large field where the asylum would be. C told us that the near miss was because of the semi. It was either speeding up or slowing down really quick, so she sped up. She was in an anxious mood after that. We walked through this large field for 10 minutes, with Z explaining that there are multiple buildings, but one of them got demolished and a couple of others had asbestos, so there were only a couple that were safe to go in. He told us it was closed down in 2003 because the patients were being mistreated or something like that. I don't remember everything that happened because my adrenaline was insane that night. We get to a building that almost looks like the outside was for transport vehicles. C refused to go in because she was anxious, so she stayed outside with Z. It ended up being me and a group of people that I didn't really know just exploring this building. The graffiti eased my anxiety a bit, but it was still eerie as we went through. Water was everywhere from leaks. There was broken glass all over the place. Computers were broken. We found clothes in old lockers, and we even found a pile of what looked like animal bones. I was partially scared because of the atmosphere, but also because I've heard of the things that M did there. After about 30 minutes or so, we left, and C and Z were not there. We had called their phones, screamed their names, looked all around this huge field, and we couldn't find them. About 15 minutes into our search, we heard the most terrifying shriek. I can't even properly describe it because it was something that I have never heard before in my life. It sounded like whoever screamed must have been in pain. It was loud and it echoed, and we all just ran, trying to figure out who it came from. We were scared that it had come from C. At this point, it's past 1 a.m. We're terrified. They're still not answering their phones, and we were terrified that we were about to have to call 911. Then we heard someone from our group say that they had found them. We ran, and they looked confused. We were all trying to explain that we were yelling for them and calling them, but they didn't hear us, and their phones didn't ring. We also told them about the scream, but they didn't hear that either. They told us that they were just in another building, and were looking for us, too. I spent the car ride on the way back to the apartment trying to explain the scream to him, because he was acting like he thought we were just joking. I think he believes now, though, because now it was just us talking about it, not a bunch of people at once. The next day I'm back at my own home, and things are pretty well back to normal. The only bruise that I had was from Z's teething puppy. Over the next few days, more and more bruises were appearing everywhere on my body, the oddest one being in the shape of a V on my forearm. I have never had that happen before, especially because it was so large that it nearly wrapped around my arm, and it was a perfect V. The other bruises were just all over my legs and arms, and are still appearing to this day. Last week, as I was settling in to go to bed, I was cuddling Boots and watching TV when I heard what sounded like a cat screaming from upstairs. I was on the couch downstairs. It was around 1 a.m., and it scared me even more because Boots was next to me and also turned his head in the direction of the sound. Our dog is a husky and German Shepherd mix, and couldn't make that noise either. The next day, I talked to my mom about it, and she told me that she hadn't heard a thing. A couple days later, my mom and I were in the living room with the cat and dog when we heard the stairs creak. They creak whenever someone is on them, but you can tell who is on them by how loud they are, if that makes sense. We looked in that direction because it sounded like a cat was coming down the stairs, but nothing was there. Boots was right next to me, and Kiefer was on the couch. My sisters weren't home either. My mom told me that I should take comfort in the fact that it's probably Princess trying to let us know she's here with us, but ever since I went to the asylum, I've been really freaked out. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was in the spring of 1998 when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went camping in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people that I'd known my whole life, and we were all very close and knew each other very well and trusted one another. We had been hiking for 5 days or so, and it was miserable. It rained every day, and we were all exhausted and sore and hungry and covered with blisters. The adults realized that we had bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather, so we had changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. It was the kind of place with hookups for RVs, picnic tables, it had fire pits and grills, and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area, far from a town or another house. There may have been a few other small groups, but if there were, we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet, and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark, and we had finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes, followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance through the woods. I heard a noise to my left, and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump about 20 feet away off the trail. There was a strange light around him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad, and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there, and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were really freaked and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot, but this was long before any of us had ever experimented with any mind-altering substance. Regardless, I could tell that they believed me. Like I said, we had known each other forever, and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth, and then walked back together in complete silence. When we got to the spot that I had seen, whoever he was gone without a trace. The water pump was still there, though. No one had noticed it before, because it was a ways off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed really scared. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I've never been able to figure out what occurred. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Unlikely. Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely. So who's to say? I want to start by saying that I'm no stranger to odd dreams. I have experienced sleep paralysis many a time throughout my life. I had a dream shadow stalker for years, and I used to have a haunted bed frame that gave me some of the worst night terrors I've ever had. I have shaman blood on my dad's side, and I myself have been studying various aspects of the occult and paranormal for over a decade. But those stories are for another post. I'm just used to this sort of thing. I wanted to express that. That leads me here. Not sure if anyone's felt this as well, but I have been a ball of anxiety lately. Obviously related to the uncertainty in the world and all, yet I still shouldn't feel it this much. The dreams I've been experiencing have been extremely strange. Like I said, I have vivid, lifelike dreams constantly, but typically they're broken up. I have been having Inception-style dreams for the past 2 months every time I go to sleep. Like I'll dream of actually waking up and going about my day, but then I actually wake up. It's so disorientating. Last night, I had a very weird dream. The strangest of them all. I can't recall what I was doing, but I remember distinctly being in a dark, dusty room. The only part I truly know is that there was some kind of box or container with a lid in front of me. Everything was in first person. It felt so real. I lifted the box, and laying in it were 2 dead gray mice. They were stiff and curled towards each other, like a heart almost. That's all I can remember. I only remembered specifically because my significant other said something about a mouse this morning. I did some investigation and read that this could mean a period of financial instability, but was curious to see if anyone else had any ideas. On Labor Day of 2015, my mother, my wife, 3 children, and I went to a very remote cabin that we had rented out. It was an old fire watchman station or something of the sort, so it had the cabin and 3 other sheds and shops. I'll try to keep it short now, but this is a really bizarre story. We unpacked, settled into the cabin, and decided to take a walk a couple of 100 yards down to the river. We were all barefoot wearing sandals with shorts. We got down to the pebbled shore and were playing, throwing rocks, etc., when I realized that there were 1-foot snakes everywhere. My wife, mom, and I yanked up the 3 kids and boogied off. After reaching a safe distance, I went back with a water bottle and caught one of them to see what it was. It turns out we were in a nest of diamondback rattlesnakes. If one of those things had latched onto one of my kids, then surely they would have died. We were about 3 hours away from any medical facility. We got back to the cabin and my mom and I went for a hike alone while my wife calmed the kiddos and fed them lunch. Upon returning about 15 minutes later, all 3 of my wife and kids were inside with the doors and windows all closed, even though we had opened everything up to cool the place off. We went inside to hear all 4 of them start yelling about a bear that was about 150 yards from the cabin, huffing and puffing at the wife and kids on the front porch while they were eating. It was down by the river, another 30 yards or so down the hill. A few hours go by, and in that time, an ATV passed 3 times with 2 inbred-looking freaks on it, and each time they stopped in front of the gate onto the property and stared at us or the cabin. Keep in mind, again, we're hours into the wilderness in Idaho with no sight of a person the entire trip except for them. We decide it's bedtime for the kiddos, as it's pitch black out. Within 10 minutes, our son, who was 5 at the time, went from being perfectly fine, active, and talkative to having a fever of 103 degrees, slightly foaming at the mouth, and being completely unresponsive. That was it. We were leaving immediately and going to seek medical attention. I opened the front door of the cabin to start loading the 2 cars, and that's when we heard 3 adults and what sounded like 4 or 6 large, heavy animals running all around the cabin and property. There was one on the right side of the house, when exiting, that I could hear pacing back and forth, breathing heavily. I made everyone stay inside and close the door every time I went out to transfer stuff into the vehicles, which took me about 4 to 5 trips. I had a stick in a big pot that I was smacking as hard and loud as I could each time and was yelling loudly at random. As soon as I finished the loading, I took out each kid individually and loaded them into the cars. Then I escorted out my mom and then my wife. My wife and I were in the lead car, so we pulled up out of the gate, and for some stupid reason or other, I felt that I needed to close it. I got out of my vehicle and walked behind it, and my mom's car by about 15 feet, and closed the gate. Now, this gate is literally a log that slides from one post to the other. It offered zero protection or barrier between me and the animals that sounded like they were out there. Right as I went to turn around, I heard loud padded footsteps walking up to me. Directly in front of me, no more than 10 feet, I see eyes shimmering from the moonlight as the deepest, scariest growl I have ever heard in my life rumbles through the air. I turned and ran so fast I swear that I must have jumped from where I was to the driver's seat of my car some 30 feet in front of me. As I landed in my seat, I slammed it into drive and spun out, finally leaving. It gets weirder and scarier, though. About 15 minutes down the road, we were still panicking about our unresponsive son. We both kept having this horrible, evil doom kind of feeling, like a shadow over us. I looked down and realized that I still had that baby rattlesnake in the water bottle in my cup holder, so I grabbed it and threw it out the window immediately. Not even 2 minutes later, we softly hear our son begin to cry. We realize that he's become responsive, and he stated something along the lines of, "Why are we leaving? What's going on?" He was crying because he was sad to leave. He couldn't even remember the last hour. The next day, my mom broke down extremely badly, sobbing her eyes out, and was hardly able to even speak. She confessed to my wife that the night before we left, she had a nightmare in which we went on the camping trip. We came across snakes, a bear, and a pack of wolves. She said that she knew a lot of bad things happened at that outpost, and that it was full of evil. Most of all, she said that one of our kids died. I swear on my life to this very day, if I ask her who died and how it happened, she immediately starts crying and refuses to tell me, or anyone else, anything more. She lives her life now with a guilt that she willingly ignored her premonition and put us in that situation, nearly taking the life of one of her dearest grandkids away. She doesn't deserve to feel like that. I know this all sounds insane, but a week later on the local news were reports of a wolf pack in that area. Wolves and bears may not coexist in harmony, but they do share territories and tend to respect each other. This outpost station of sorts was 1.5 hours into the wilderness from Loman Banks, Idaho, if you want to verify that these animals actually exist around there. I grew up in the mountains for most of my pre-early teen years, as did my wife until she was 10 years old. I even have a half a sleeve of the wilderness and trees on my left arm. With that said, we don't care to go to the mountains anymore. When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sort of haunting shows. Now, I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got a hold, I asked him where he really got the money from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend? Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet? My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however, something they definitely would have voiced being distraught about had they noticed that we had taken their cash. The story he gave me was that a young girl, maybe about the age of 7, had followed him onto the school bus that afternoon. He had never met this girl before, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat right in front of him. After riding the bus for a while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, and the other kids were giving him weird looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly retrieved from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. A shiver ran down my spine, as the note wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy him. Given that he had $10 now, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, I was extremely intrigued by this, even if it sounded absurd. I suggested we make a makeshift Ouija board to see if we could contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in the 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, the necklace began to move and shake. Either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it really was something paranormal. We were able to get a name. Kate. After asking dumb things like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes, me and my brother decided to stop for the night after starting to get creeped out. We never said goodbye before ending. Eventually, playing with the board would be a daily occurrence. We thought we'd made a friend, and truly believed that someone was talking to us. Me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we both got our tablets, placed them in front of our TV, and hit record. The first thing I asked was, if someone was here, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy? We decided to repeat the same question, but this time we said that we would leave the room and give it a minute. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back up, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Coincidence? I mean, things fall, especially when you're not careful at placing them. So we brushed it off. In December of 6th grade, though, things got really weird. I had started hearing voices in my head, claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I got so scared one night that I had grabbed the Bible that one of my religious friends had gifted me, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mom that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't get into detail, as some of it was a little graphic. She and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic, and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I never told them that I was hearing voices again, but I would space out often, talking and having conversations with this thing that I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, I forgot about the ghost, and we no longer talked. I will never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, or if they were just intrusive thoughts. I was just glad for it finally to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night, or feeling that someone was pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up to just be my imagination playing tricks on me now. But I do still have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of spirit attached to me, following me. Not a bad one, but just a constant presence. This took place a few years ago. I was with my best friend and we decided to go camping at a campsite in Flagstaff named Lockett Meadow. We had taken our dogs. After a day of hiking and exploration, we played around a fire and eventually went to sleep. I awoke in the middle of the night to find this deep figure outside of our tent, burying itself into our tent. It had a weird way of hovering back and forth over my body, and my dog, who was curled up awake and not moving or making a sound, was at the bottom of my feet. I look over and see my best friend passed out, and his dog, which I'm unsure if it was awake, but clearly I was the only one between my friend and I that's experiencing this terrifying encounter. I eventually covered my head and thought about anything else that might make me fall asleep. The next day I asked my friend if he had somehow been awake through all of that. I explained what had happened. He replied no, and thought that I was just making it up. I told him maybe it was a bear, so we looked around our campsite, but couldn't find anything. No trails, no prints, nothing. We also had food out on a table near our tents, and a trash bag hung up on a broken branch, so even if it was a bear, I'm really surprised that it didn't get into any of our stuff. Either way, I remember how scared shitless I was, seeing this dark object observing our tent. Could it somehow have been the wind? A deer? Who knows? But this is just one encounter out of the whole trip. The next night we decide to camp at Beaver Creek. Mind you, we're in Arizona. Before we wanted to settle in, we explored Sedona. We drove to Oak Creek and parked our car near a trail down by the water. We took our dogs and hiked to the creek. After we finished jumping in and swimming, we dried off and were about to head out. Next thing you know, in our peripheral vision, we see a giant rock being thrown near us. It makes a huge splash in the water. We look up and don't see anything above, so we ran over stones and rocks to get a clear view of the top, and still see no one. We yell out taunts and curse words, but still heard no one running off or any kind of sound in response. When we got to our next campsite at Beaver Creek and set up, my friend told me that throughout the trip since we started in Flagstaff, he had rocks being thrown at him, right up until that giant one at Oak Creek. We looked at each other and thought that maybe someone was following behind us, messing with us. Then we sort of laughed it off and said no, that was impossible, that we were just trying to connect the dots to have it be a cool look-back adventure. Well, I'm glad that it didn't turn into a part 3, because nothing happened that night, or the next day, where we packed up and headed home with nothing more than a memory that we wanted to rationalize. This is a true story that happened to me. Back in 2008, my girlfriend and I decided to go to an abandoned mental asylum off of Highway 82 in Alabama called Old Bryce. It shut down a few years back due to malpractice, and some of the ghost legends, like the number 2 ghost, involve murder by staff at the facility. Essentially, this was a dumping ground for people that society didn't know what to do with. Thousands of people were sent there and died there. The facility consisted of 4 buildings: Bryce, the residence hall, SD Allen, the medical facility, the crematorium, and the guard shack. I have seen 2 ghosts in the residence hall, the bigger of the 2 that I can share with you now. My second visit to Old Bryce was strange. It was my first time inside the building, and I came prepared. It was me, my girlfriend, and our friend Chris. I had a flashlight and a DVD camcorder. Through the main entrance is a staircase on the right which zigzags up to the 2nd floor, complete with anti-suicide fence at the top. Make a left, another left, and then a quick right, and you are in the hall that led to the children's corridor. I had the flashlight in my left hand and my camera in my right, scanning, trying to catch something. On the left, at the entrance to that room, there was a bathroom with only a tub in it. I thought I saw something in the bathroom, and shined the light that way, but nothing. I moved the camera and light, thought I saw it again, and shined it back. Still nothing. Our night continued and finished without incident. The next day, I reviewed the footage. In that bathroom, I shined toward something I thought I saw, and I was right. When the light pans to the right, a bluish-white illuminated little girl's face peers out from behind the door to follow the beam. As the light shines back in her direction over the course of 2 frames, she is half behind the door, and then in the next frame, she is gone. My heart felt like an ice cube ran through it, because I was in such shock.
I proceeded to show everyone that I knew. The girl's appearance was that of younger than 10, hair parted in the middle, unusually large forehead, and had some apparent deformation or disorder. I made the mistake of leaving the camera at a friend's house overnight, who is apparently not my friend, and he stole it. This is where it gets weirder. 2.5 years later, I was living in a different city. One of the legends of old Bryce is that the windows grow back, and if you do any damage to them, that spirits will follow you home. I broke a window. I was laying in bed one night, around 3 or 4 a.m. I was on the verge of sleep, aware of where I was, and very comfortable. Out of nowhere, this immobilizing, tingling sensation started at the tips of my toes. I was laying on my stomach with my arms under the pillow, completely helpless as this sensation crept its way slowly up my legs, midsection, and eventually my entire body over the course of about 20 seconds. Once it covered me, I heard the whisper of a little girl directly in my ear say, "I'm in your room." I cringed, and for some reason I told her that I loved her. The feeling stopped and left me on the verge of tears. It may or may not have been that little girl from the asylum, but according to the legend, it makes sense.
I was a senior in high school, and I always hung out with my sister, who was 5 years older than me, and her friends. That night it was us siblings, her best friend H, who was the same age as my sister, and our friend G, who was about 20 and enlisted in the army. We thought it would be a great idea, since it was close to Halloween, to play with a Ouija board for the first time. We got a Ouija board and decided to turn off all the lights in the house and light a few candles to really set the mood. So we sat on the floor of the living room and started our little game. I was sitting between H and G, across from my sister. It took a while, but we finally got a response when G asked if anyone was there. The planchette slid to yes. We kinda giggled because we thought it was one of us. But then it started spelling out Mama. My sister and I immediately go pale and make eye contact across the board. Our grandmother had passed away next door, about a year prior to this. Before we could ask another question, the planchette spelled out the word love. We still weren't convinced. A little spooked, but not scared. G then asked the board, "How many children do you have?" And the planchette slid to the number 2, which is the correct number of kids that our grandmother had. It's important to know that G and H didn't know very much about our grandmother. They came into our lives after our grandmother had passed, so they never met her. The planchette then spelled out the words, "Roll Tide." Now we live in Alabama, and my grandmother was the biggest Alabama football fan. She would watch every game. The Alabama football catchphrase is, "Roll Tide." My sister and I immediately begin crying because it just seems so unreal. And then the planchette starts moving again. This time it's sliding around and going to the word goodbye. I ask, "Do you want us to stop playing?" And the planchette quickly slides to yes. My sister doesn't want to stop. She asks, "But why? We want to ask you more questions." And the planchette quickly moves across the board to spell out the word bad. That was more than enough for me. I felt like if this was my mama, and she was telling us to stop playing, maybe we should take her advice and quit while we were ahead. She said bad. Did that mean that something bad would happen? Or that doing that was bad, with the Ouija board? I don't want to find out. But after trying to convince my sister and friends, it did no good. The planchette keeps circling the board and going back to goodbye over and over again. Finally, everyone says goodbye because it's clear that nothing else was going to be discussed. But then, for some reason, I was talked into participating again. This time, when something answered us back, the planchette moved across the board even faster, but it was between 2 letters only. Z-O-Z-O-Z-O. And that's all it would say. I don't know what the others felt because we really didn't talk about it much, but to me it felt like the room became colder. It was then unanimous that we did decide to say goodbye. We were shaking. Whatever we had just spoken to didn't feel right. My sister and I decided to sleep in the same bed. I remember lying in bed and being huddled together and just looking around the room. Every sound made me jump. I swear I could see dark humanoid figures all around. Maybe it was paranoia, but I definitely did not sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about how Mama or whatever was imitating her had said bad, like it was a warning. My sister ended up getting rid of the board shortly after. I'm not sure what she did with it. I know her and some other friends tried to play with it again in a very old graveyard near our house with graves that dated back to the 1800s. While they were playing, they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods around the graveyard, and what sounded like scraping on one of the headstones. I don't plan on touching another Ouija board again. This happened about 13 years ago. I'm currently 28 and my childhood dog died in early high school for me. This wasn't too long after. Upon looking up what this is, it was most likely a false awakening, but still gives me chills to this day. I shared a room with my older brother who was a pretty heavy sleeper once he got there. He'd usually be up playing video games all night, and I got used to being able to fall asleep through the sounds of him yelling at COD players for using noob tubes and all that good stuff. One night I woke up feeling the foot of my bed sink in like someone was down there. When I looked, I noticed a small child sitting with his back toward me. The child seemed to be wearing a black shirt with white horizontal stripes. I immediately thought to myself, alright, fuck that, and went back to sleep. I woke up what felt like a few hours later, and he was now standing at the foot of my bed, facing me, holding my dead dog's head in his hands. The child was surrounded by an extremely dark aura, so much so that I didn't gather any details on skin complexion or anything. I immediately lost my shit and freaked out, falling out of my bed. This part creeped me out because the fall was very detailed. I knocked over an acoustic guitar that I had on a stand near my bed when I fell out, and my brother shuffled in his sleep due to the noise. When I tried to wake him up, he mumbled, half asleep, that we needed to get more Pepsi, not an encounter with him that would surprise me at all, and went back to sleep. I then scrambled back into my bed, all while this kid was just watching me, holding my dog's head throughout. I fell back asleep, and then had my real awakening that morning. The guitar was in its stand, and everything was normal. I ended up not telling anybody about this dream. The really fucked up part, and why this particularly bad dream still gives me chills, has to do with the fact that my dog was buried in my backyard, in a little side yard that always had some really weird energy to it. Months later, my friends and I were hanging out, and we usually smoke weed in my backyard close to this side yard area. We had made our way inside and were munching and watching movies when my good friend Joe said that he needed to run to the backyard and get his phone. He went out to get it with his usual demeanor, but I heard his footsteps running full sprint back to the back door into the house. His skin was pale, and he was visibly shaken up. I asked him what was wrong. His response? Dude, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I just saw a little kid standing where your dog is buried. My brother and I were staying out at night at our grandparents' house, and now for context, her house is in the middle of the ghetto in Golf Manor. Anyway, me and my brother were watching TV and my grandma was at the store, and then suddenly my brother says, "Want to go into the basement?" Not trying to sound like a wuss, I agreed. This was the worst decision of the month. We go into the basement, and it is creepy as hell, and when we reach the bottom of the staircase, the door shuts behind us. Now, I just shake it off as natural, but still, I feel uneasy. We go into the garage because her garage is in the basement, so we start going through. We find a rusty pipe and a motorcycle handlebar and some faint writing on the wall. We obviously find other things like a lawnmower and lawn stuff too. But then, we heard a loud bang, like the sound of a metal door slamming. It was the laundry room door. We almost crapped our pants, and we ran back upstairs, scared as hell. Later that night, we started to fall asleep. Grandma was already asleep. We heard what sounded like all the basement doors opening and slamming shut. Grandma, like I said, was not awake. We ended up finally falling asleep and told her about what happened the next morning. She just laughed and said, "That's just Jim messing with you." And then she explained that Jim was the old house owner who had died there. That didn't really help us much, but it did ease our minds. So, since my medication changed, I haven't been experiencing sleep paralysis that much anymore. But for years, I've had it on a constant basis, nearly every day. I can elaborate on the neurological stuff behind sleep paralysis, but basically, it's very related to stress, anxiety, and a bad sleep schedule. Anyway, I usually don't have auditory or visual hallucinations during sleep paralysis, but almost during every episode I experience the feeling of leaving my body. I wake up in my bed without being able to move, and I feel my body start to float, accompanied by this awful fear that at any time I might fall down and die. Sometimes I even get to actually see my own body sleeping on my bed from above, but it's always hazy and I can't actually make out any of my physical features. I simply know that it's me on the bed. At other times I have the same feeling of leaving my body, but instead of floating, it's something pulling me by the feet and dragging me out of my bed. I don't see anyone. It's just the feeling of being dragged. I would love to know if anyone else has experienced this during sleep paralysis. Is this merely a symptom of it? Or could I really be having an out-of-body experience? I'm Catholic, but not very religious at all, so I'm wondering about other spiritual possibilities. When I was 14, I went camping in the summer with the Girl Guides. We only traveled a few miles away to a place that we had visited a few times for game nights. Each year our guides would merge with the two others in the area for a huge campout that lasted about 5 days. The place we were staying in was rumored to have a ghost in the main house. The story says that it only shows itself to members of the family. We were staying on the large estate near the woods, right away from the house. I had been there quite a lot, and knew the grounds pretty well, which was awesome. I was staying in a tent with the younger girls. They were aged 10 to 13, because I didn't have my own tent like the other older girls. The first night went by smoothly. We built a climbing frame, lit candles in the dark, and pretended that we had landed on an alien planet. It was a silly, fun game. The next morning, me and one of the other girls get up early. Our group job was to collect firewood for breakfast, so we ventured into the woods on our own. We were joking around, grabbing sticks and stuff as we walked along. We ended up at the obstacle course and decided to play on it for a while, even though it was out of bounds. When we were done, we grabbed the firewood and started walking back to camp. The woods, to me, they felt and looked strange. It was as if the place was slightly different. I decided to start trying to scare the girl that I was with, just messing around, trying to spook her because it was funny to me. She got really scared and ran off and left me behind. I wasn't bothered as I slowly walked back. That was when I saw movement to my left, and then again up ahead. As I was about to leave the woods, I saw a man out of the corner of my eye. He was wearing a white t-shirt and a cap, carrying something long. I think it was a shotgun. There was no one there. I just shrug it off. Stuff like that doesn't bother me. I've seen strangers out in the woods before. Once out of the forest, everything goes back to normal. I looked back and the woods were as they should have been. Not like they were moments ago. I don't know how to explain it. They just seemed newer for a while. Not as wild, I guess. But everything was kind of grainy, misty. Except that there was no mist. So I don't think anything of it. I enjoy the camp out, we play games, sing songs, and just have a good time. On the second to last day, we play the game. We landed on the alien planet, and once we had breakfast, we had to go hide in the woods, build a shelter, a fire to make food, and people had to go steal food from the campsite without being seen. I am left in the woods on my own for ages as the other girls go around gathering the food. I built a pretty awesome shelter, but I realized I needed my penknife, which I had left in my tent, so I went to go get it. I get to the tent to find the kids that I was sharing it with crying their eyes out, terrified. Eventually, I get the story out of them. They had been making their food when a man, wearing a white t-shirt and a cap, had appeared and then vanished in front of them where I had seen him. I assured the kids that it was fine, and that it couldn't hurt them, and they eventually went back into the woods, but they were obviously very shaken. I got the blame for telling them a scary story, but I had only tried to scare that one girl at the very start and hadn't mentioned anything about the man to anyone. That night was the campfire. As it ended, we all ran through the pitch-black woods back to camp, leaving the person looking after us all alone in the forest. She had a light, so it was no big deal. She had to make sure that the fire was out as well. I found out a week after that she had been horrified walking back to camp and refused to go back into the woods again after that. She has refused to camp at that site ever since, but she won't tell us what she saw. The last day, I got bored while packing everything up. After all that had happened, I was in a ghost hunting mood, so me and two of the other girls go into the trees. I'm in the lead, and I'm walking along a path. I stopped and heard footsteps in front of us. Clear footsteps, walking on dead leaves, but no one was there. No one was anywhere near us. I followed the sounds along a path. Someone had heavy boots on. It was so bizarre. We all had trainers on. The girls I was with were silent. They could hear it as well. I followed the sounds around to a clearing at the very edge of the woods, where it stopped. I decided to sit down in the grass. The others followed me, but they sat behind me because they were scared at this point. I do the whole, "If anyone is there, could you give me a sign?" routine. As I finished, a white mist suddenly fell over the woods. You could see things moving behind it, though nothing was clear. It hung in the air as the other two girls ran off screaming. I sat for a minute and watched before saying thank you. As I said this, it was as if a gust of wind hit, and it disappeared. There was no wind. It was just amazing. That was the last of the strange stuff for that camping trip. We had to finish packing up and left the camp that afternoon. I've been back a few times since, and nothing else strange has happened. The woods have always felt normal. A few years after that, I found out that I'm actually related to the family who owned the house and estate. I'm always curious if the activity picked up because I was staying on the grounds. The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. When we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then one day, his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the three of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' social security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he had become their father. The only father they ever really had. He was their true family. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted toward darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed, and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so, for example. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead to your last is exhausting and traumatizing to say the least. One day we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted to divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out, and for us to be together. So when he called and begged for the chance just to talk things over, of course I agreed, and went outside to anxiously await his return to pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by the time he arrived. At least, that was what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got in the car, the whole vibe felt off. Chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare and then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I didn't really know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour, deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing along with the glue that had held together his tiny little broken family. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back into the car. I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked, and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. "It feels like a trick," I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulders tensed, and his expression grew more malvoyant than ever. "That's because it was a trick," he murmured. "If I can't have you, no one can." Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one of those you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason that it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, who had heard the phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside, in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they could make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there. When I looked again, he was gone. The next day, my mom came to get me, because he wrecked my car, so I no longer had a ride. He was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside.
Last year, I went to the Transalgony Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. It was a birthday trip for my friend, and since we both had an interest in the paranormal, we decided to head there and check it out. If you're a paranormal enthusiast, you should know that this place is supposedly haunted. Looking into the brief history of the place, deaths, suicides, housing for Civil War patients, housing for tuberculosis patients, and medical patients, you would definitely expect some ghosts are not at rest. It was cold and dark as it was November at around 5 p.m. or so. We made it for the last historic tour of the West Wing and the Civil War Wing. As we waited for the tour guide to gather our group, we took a tour of the front entrance and saw all these patients' drawings. One was of a man cutting his father's head off. And there was a long list of reasons for being admitted into the asylum. We then went back to wait in the lobby for our tour to begin. As we sat there waiting, I felt a slight tug at my jacket on my right side. My friend was standing on my left side. I brushed it off, as maybe being my sleeve button caught my jacket, just some casual debunking, since what are the odds of 12 people standing in a lobby that the ghost somehow decided to screw with me? Our tour began, and if you studied the place you would know that the building is shaped into L-like sections as to try and let in as much sunlight to the building as possible. It was one of their treatment ideas. Eventually, we made it to a section where they hosted the Halloween parties, which was originally, if I remember, a place where patients could acquire their medication or new clothes. After the tour guide walked away, I waited for my turn to walk through the doorway. At this moment, a loud bang came from the closet. I again shrugged it off and debunked it as maybe an animal or a bird who had gotten into the closet and knocked something over in there. Our tour finally came to a close, and we began to walk back to the lobby. I was in the back of the group with my friend in front of me. No one was behind me. As we were beginning to walk through the connection between the first and second part of the building, I looked back at the end of the hall. Down at the end, by the nurse's station, I saw a large, black figure cross in front of the window. I was immediately spooked. I started taking steps back and forth to see if maybe it was my shadow or anything really like that, but it was nothing. I could not debunk it. So I just continued on and tried to write it out of my mind. Then came the final walk to the lobby. This building is massive, by the way. If I remember correctly about this, they said the building is almost a quarter-mile long from end to end, so you can only imagine how long these wing halls are. Before I made it to the lobby, a chill went up my neck. I'm again in the back of the group. I would also like to mention that I have long hair as well. After that chill, I immediately felt as if someone blew on my hair, and the sound of a quick breath. There was no wind in that building, no doors being opened or closed, nothing. Someone or something blew my hair. I continued to keep my cool and started talking to my friend about it, who had no experiences whatsoever and thought that I was just trying to spook her. I was a bit unnerved, but we didn't want to leave without a t-shirt, so we went into the gift shop and talked to the lady inside about if she had experienced paranormal activity. She said most of it happens on the 3rd floor, and has had many people talk about seeing, hearing, and feeling things.
This is a completely true story. There was one time about 2 or 3 years ago. I was out in the woods camping with my brother, and we had just gotten there around 4 p.m. to set up and all. Once we had settled in, we got a fire going. I told my brother I was going to go get some firewood because we only had enough to get it started. So I went out and it was around 7 p.m. Then I got really cold all of a sudden, even though the weather was not cold at all. When I got the sudden rush of coldness, I felt a heavy feeling of just pure evil, hatred, and despair. I immediately went back to my brother. He told me it was fine, that it was probably just a strong wind that had given me a chill. But I knew that something was wrong. We sat around the fire, and I just felt like someone or something was watching me. Once again, I started to feel the same feeling of evil, but this time faintly. It slowly started getting worse and worse, almost as if it were growing inside of me. I brushed it off and went back to bed. At around 2:20-ish in the morning, I heard something that sounded like a scream, and it woke me up. I looked around in the tent and got a flashlight. When I turned the light on, I noticed that my arm was bleeding and had been cut open by something in multiple spots. I woke my brother in a panic and told him what had happened. He said he didn't know what I was talking about, and my arm wasn't even cut, even though I was looking right at it and it was obviously slashed open and bleeding. I said, "Are you joking?" And he continued to say that nothing had happened to me and that I was just pranking him. At that moment, I felt a huge amount of pain in my arm, and then I heard the scream again, but it didn't sound like how a human would scream. It was more of a screech, as if there were an animal or some creature in the distance that was in pain. I looked at my brother and asked if he had heard it, and he asked me, "What do you mean, did I hear that? There was nothing." At that point, I was afraid for my life. I was praying that nothing else would happen. But after a few minutes, I heard the scream again. Every time I heard it, I would feel that dread, that evil again, and my arm would start to have a burning sensation. Eventually, all of it stopped, although after that, I wasn't able to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my brother that I wanted to leave ASAP. When we went to get into the truck, I could have sworn out of the corner of my eye that I saw something run through the woods. I looked to the right while packing the stuff up, and 4 of the trees had marks like they had been clawed by something. But the thing is that the marks were at least 12 feet up in the trees, maybe higher. I was so tired and scared that I couldn't even think about it anymore. I just got into the truck, and we left. To this day, I still haven't gone camping again. I'm married with 3 kids. The kids are older, 20, 17, and 10. We just bought a house and moved in the first week of December. Our room and my daughter's rooms are upstairs, and my 20-year-old son has a room in the basement. There's a storage room across from his room, then a big area with a fireplace where I have my gaming console, TV, and chair set up. Anyhow, on Christmas Day, the wife and kids were getting ready to go to her dad's house. I wasn't going because me and her dad didn't get along. I fire up the PlayStation in the basement and put on my headset. They're all upstairs running around because they're going to be late, and I see my son come downstairs and head into his room to grab something. A few minutes go by and I'm focusing on my game. Out of the corner of my eye, I see what I thought was my son leave his room and walk into the storage room, then slam the door hard and loud enough that I hear it through my noise-canceling headset. I pull off my headset and yell, "What the hell, man?" and look over at the storage room. The house is quiet. I walk over and open the storage room door. It's a 10 by 10 room with no windows and nothing in it. I look in his room, but he's not in there. I go upstairs, and they've already left. The van is gone. I told my wife about it, and she just laughed. Funny thing is, I never mentioned it to my son, but the other day I came home from work and he says, "Damn, Dad, I could hear you in the gaming room until like 4 a.m. I'm surprised you made it to work this morning." Me and all the girls had gone to bed by 9 p.m. the night before. I first discovered the Ouija board when I was 14. A girl was visiting from America, I'm in the UK, and she told us how to talk to ghosts. 8 of us went to her house and made a board with ripped bits of paper and a turned wine glass. 4 of us would put our fingers on the glass, and we would swap someone out every so often. This way we believed that it would eliminate anyone who might be pushing the glass. I'll add here that the finger that had been in the glass always felt cold afterward. Don't know if others have noticed this. The first few days were spent asking silly questions like, "Does so-and-so fancy me?" or "Who will I marry?" etc. On the 3rd day, things took a darker turn, and we started getting responses told to us without asking. It started saying things like, "So-and-so will get run over," and "X will die of cancer," and other really freaky shit. This scared us, and we stopped playing. Years later, in my early 20s, I shared a flat with my brother and boyfriend at the time, and bored one night we decided to do a Ouija board. So we made a board, as I had when I was younger, and set to it. It didn't take long for the glass to move, and we asked who it was, where they came from, and how they had died. It told us its name was Bill. He was an old hippie, and he had died from an overdose. Anyhow, things went on for a while, then my boyfriend, who was convinced that we were the ones pushing the glass, said if there's really a ghost here, prove it. I kid you not a second later, the lights went out. At that time, I had one of those old-fashioned meters that you had to put money in, so after my initial shock, I reasoned that I needed to put a coin in the meter and stood up to do it. But before I got to the door, the lights came back on. Somewhat spooked, I sat back down and me and my brother put our fingers back on the glass. My boyfriend point-blank refused. The glass then spelled out, "Chilly trick, hey." After that, it kept going in circles and moving toward me, so I decided that enough was enough and said goodbye. A few years ago, after Facebook started and I got back in touch with my old school friends, I heard that one of them had died of cancer in his late teens. Not sure about the other prophecy, but I know that I'll never do a Ouija board again, and I firmly believe that we do tap into forces beyond our 5 senses. I work in an Alzheimer's unit. Most of the residents don't stay around for very long because they're on hospice, so basically I barely get to know them, and before I know it, they've passed away. One resident we had did not have dementia, but schizophrenia. Her sister stuck her in there as more of a convenience for herself rather than considering her sister's mental health. The resident was extremely bright and remembered silly things that even I couldn't recall that had happened. Once COVID hit, she decided life wasn't worth living and that she would never get better. She starved herself to death. It was heartbreaking, and she suffered many delusions and manic episodes during her last days. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened the month following her passing, until the fire alarm went off out of nowhere during lunch. My coworker and I immediately went to guard the outside doors since they would unlock automatically once the fire alarm was triggered. We assumed it was another drill and were annoyed that it had happened at such a busy time of the day. On my way to the back door, I popped my head into each room just to make sure that everything was clear. When I came to that empty room, the minute that I opened the door, it was frigid. I assumed that it was normal since the room was empty and thought nothing more of it. I stood by the back door and waited for the alarm to stop. My boss came back with a concerned look on his face and told me that the alarm system said that it was coming from the room where that resident had just recently passed. I explained to him that that would be impossible because I had just checked and there was no sign of a fire. The alarm continued to go haywire for another 30 minutes, even when shut off. It was extremely bizarre. Afterward, I had asked out loud if it was our resident who had just passed, and it felt like a warm bucket of water was dumped over my head, and I couldn't resist the urge to cry. The kind of crying and sobbing that hurts your entire body. Sometimes she opens the fire extinguisher box to remind me that she's still around. You need a key and a strong arm to crank that box open. Anyway, I found it open again today after doing rounds, and was reminded of this experience. Since I was 18 or so, I've been having dreams where I know it's a dream, but I cannot wake up. Once I dreamed that I was sleeping in my bed at my parents' house, and suddenly I woke up in the dream, and everything was normal. TV on, door slightly open, but there was a weird feeling in the room, which I ignored. I tried to get back to sleep, but my conscience told me to turn my head to the door, which I did. It was slightly open again, but this time it was opening a little more every second that passed, and a dark presence was on the other side of the room. At this point, I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and tried to get out of the room, but something was holding me back, and the path from my bed to the door seemed eternal. Suddenly, everything stopped, and I woke up again in the same position I dreamed of first, TV on, door slightly open. I was still dreaming, and the same thing happened again. Door slowly opening, and me trying to run away from the room through a never-ending path from my bed to the door, with a weird feeling of someone watching me all along. This was a cycle that happened a number of times, that I can't remember, but it was more than 4. I knew I was dreaming, but could not wake up. I was really, really scared. I tried to wake me up by yelling or hitting me in the dream. Nothing worked. I remember that in real life I was not in my parents' house, and therefore I was not in that bed. At that moment, when I remembered that, I woke up. I dreamed something like that a couple of weeks ago where I couldn't wake up even though I knew I was dreaming. I have no idea why this happens. This story took place during my childhood when I was about 12 years old. A few days ago I thought about it and still don't know exactly what it was and what I should think. It's not the most spectacular story, but anyway. I grew up in an apartment that was pretty outside the city and close to a forest. We had a lot of greenery around, and we were always playing and sometimes also camping outside with friends during the summer. So one night me and 2 friends decided to build my tent and sleep outside. We were always then staying up really long and telling ghost stories. While we did this, we suddenly heard noises from outside the tent. We were all holding our breath. Then we could hear steps. They came closer and closer, and then the steps even went around our tent before stopping. We got really scared and said, "Whoever you are, go away or we will call the police." It seemed to work because the steps continued and headed away from our tent. After a minute or so, we then tried to be brave and go outside the tent to see who it might have been. Then, when we looked out, we saw a woman, dressed in a long, white gown, walking away in the dark. I still don't know who or what she was, but it continues to give me chills. This happened to me a few months ago, and just once. I was sleeping on my couch when I was suddenly in a paralysis state. I couldn't move no matter what I did. As I was trying to move, I heard a female voice laughing in my ear. I couldn't see them, but I clearly heard that they were laughing. I tried to scream, but couldn't let out a sound. Then I woke up, a little sweaty and terrified. My heart was pumping so much that it hurt my ears. I looked everywhere, but saw no one. I didn't go back to sleep after this, because this wasn't my first experience, and I realized if I go to sleep again, the same thing would happen. This was the first time I ever experienced something terrified, so I didn't risk it, and stayed up all night. Ever since, I've never had an experience like this one again. I should also mention that I live in a house that gives off a terrible vibe and has a history of violence. The poor house suffered from an abusive family. It's possible that this house brings out the worst in people, because my mom unfortunately lost herself. She was now abusive and worse. She was a kind woman who didn't want any problems, but unfortunately we had an abusive parent figure. But save that story for another time. Ever since I was a kid, I had paranormal experiences. One intense rule of the house my mom gave me was never to participate in a Ouija board. When I was 14 years old, I'm now 20, I let my curiosity get the best of me and decided to do a Ouija board with a friend. In my room in the complete dark, we began the process. To my surprise, nothing happened. Later that night, I let my mind and fear get the best of me and decided to sleep with my mom, who had no clue that I had previously participated in a Ouija board, otherwise she would have killed me. As I was falling asleep, my mom asleep right next to me, I saw the silhouette of a large man in the doorway. At first, I told myself that it was just my brother. I called his name twice, then noticed that this figure was at least 6 inches taller than my brother and completely unresponsive to what I was saying. I started to panic and pray as I realized that this was not my brother and perhaps something far more evil that I had invited into the house. I was too afraid to move or to wake my mom. After about 5 minutes, though it felt like 10 years, the figure disappeared. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I was getting ready with my mom in the bathroom. Keep in mind that she has no idea what I had seen in her room last night, or even that I had done the Ouija board. She brings up to me a nightmare that she had had the previous night. After I asked her to tell me, the answer brought me to tears. She said that there was a demonic entity in the hallway, and as she went to touch it, it threw her across the room. As I broke down in tears and told her the truth, we proceeded to bless our house. I will never do a Ouija board again. I recently went bush camping with my boyfriend on Crown Land near Stone Mills, Ontario. It was our first time doing bush camping, so I sent a video of our campsite set up to a friend. Days after this happened, I talked to my friend, who asked me about the ghost in the video that I was completely unaware of since I didn't take a second look at it after sending. When I had that closer look, I zoomed in to see a terrifying skeleton-like figure. At first, I thought it was a glare on the lens from the fire, but the figure is moving way quicker than the speed of the camera. This place was very deserted, but throughout the night, I heard clear footsteps that sounded human. So much so that I thought that the cops had come to kick us out when I saw a flashlight point at us from the woods. I quickly pointed my light back, but never saw any animals or people. I have been camping a lot and have had deer, squirrels, and raccoons come to my campsite, and their footsteps did not sound like the ones that I had heard. I'm not a believer of the paranormal or anything of the sort, so I didn't even think about it until watching the actual footage. My friend Ava hasn't lived with her mom in over 2 years since she moved in with her boyfriend. But recently I went back to her mom's house with her to grab some plants that she had propagated and have lunch. It was a normal day and I had been in the house many times before, so it wasn't any different. The visit was short, but when they went upstairs to discuss what they should do with her old room, I was left to my own devices on the first floor. The basement didn't have a door to the downstairs and the dining room was adjacent to it. So naturally, I decided to look down the stairs since it always gave me a spook. I'm not really a huge fan of the paranormal, and I never really had a cut and dry experience. I also never quote-unquote pick up on vibes either. But I hated the vibe of her mom's place, especially the basement. When I went to the stairs, I looked down them and saw a weird, humanoid figure in the darkness staring back at me. My entire body felt fuzzy, and I couldn't move until I heard Ava and her mom coming back down the stairs, and I hightailed it away from there. Not really sure what it was, but Ava has always said that the house was haunted, and that she avoids the basement like the plague. When I was about 5 years old, I used to have these scary, recurring dreams that always had the same old woman in them. The old woman had gray, curly, short hair, and she was always wearing a creepy black dress with lace on the hems. In the dreams, she would always be trying to scare me. It seemed as though she took pleasure in scaring me. A prominent one that I remember is her sitting on top of me whilst I slept, with a basket of flowers. She would just stare right at me. So only about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, that same exact woman appeared in my dream. Same scary vibe and everything. What is super creepy about this occurrence is that I hadn't thought about this woman or talked about her for so many years. It was totally random for that to happen to me. Plus, this recent dream was just as vivid as the others. Almost as though she was visiting me again through her own free will. Another thing that might not have anything to do with the dream is that when I was a child I had a black dress just like hers that would hang in my closet, and I didn't know where it came from.
It always creeped me out because it looked like the scary old woman's dress. I can't remember where I got it, but I might have worn it to my grandmother's funeral, who died when I was 2 or 3.
In the early 2000s, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just gotten through divorce and my mom started dating this guy. He would come over to our house regularly. Things didn't seem that bad at first, but he actually drank daily. This was something I didn't understand yet at my age, but yeah. So this guy wasn't all that bad with my sister, who was 2 or 3 at the time, but he took some sadistic interest in hurting me. He would arrive at our house almost every day, and the first thing he would do was take off his belt and start beating me with it. This got to the point where I would hide if I knew he was coming. As for why my mother didn't leave him then, he threatened to kill us if she did. Now, this one incident is burned into my memory. On one random day, he had found a nice little cardboard box. He picked me up and shoved me into said box and sat on top of it. My mother was doing the dishes, and I assumed she couldn't hear me screaming for her as I peered out of the box's handle hole at her back, before he covered the holes with his hands. I screamed for a good few minutes as this asshole just laughed about torturing me. The only reason he got off the box was that I had a small screwdriver in my pocket that I used to stab him right in his ass cheek. This got him to fly up off the box, and pissed him off because he wasn't having fun anymore. He picked me up again and carried me off to my room, where he proceeded to beat me with his belt. Then he left me in my room after taking my lamp and locked my door. I was afraid of the dark, so I cried and screamed some more. I did so until he finally left, and my mother came and opened my door again. The random beatings would go on until he eventually got in trouble for something and ended up going to jail. Sometimes I think maybe my mother called the police on him. He called my mom from jail and told her that if she found anyone else, that he would kill her, me, and my younger sister. We ended up moving 3 cities over, and as far as I know, my mom never heard from him again. This guy is almost single-handedly responsible for several of my long-term phobias, and as an adult now, I'd kick his ass if I saw him again. We have an abandoned asylum just outside of our village, and me and a friend decided to go take a look. We both love to do parkour, and we really wanted to climb on top of this thing. We did, and after a few times when we went there, nothing happened. The asylum itself did look a bit scary though, but that's just a thing with old abandoned buildings, so we kept going there and had no encounters or weird noises, nothing like that. Until last Sunday. We parked our bikes next to the building and walked around it to the back, where we would most of the time climb up. So after a couple of hours, we climbed back down and started to walk back to our bikes. This was when we started to notice that there were other small buildings around the asylum hidden in the woods. We also noticed a small bunker-like building with leaves and grass covering it, and decided to check it out. We walked down the staircase leading up to a door which would lead into the bunker. Surprisingly, it wasn't locked, so we opened it. When we walked in after turning on our flashlights, we began to notice a small room at the end of the hallway. It also looked like it had a cell room where they could have had prisoners or patients, I guess. We looked at each other and decided to walk toward it, when my friend suddenly spoke to me. He said that he was feeling a very cold breath on his neck, and that he had a pain in his stomach. I told him to stay calm, when suddenly I started to get a bad headache out of nowhere. The room began to feel very, very cold, and we both ran back to the door up the stairs and back to our bikes.
We did not go back for a second, and did not stop running until we were outside. Then we looked at each other, still in shock. We did not know what to say. After a few minutes of silence, we went back home. I have not been to the area ever since, and the event that happened down there in that small bunker will always be in my brain.
I am right now sitting on my front porch, smoking a cigarette. I cannot bring myself to go back inside my house. There is someone in there. Just over 2 months ago, I moved into a new house after losing nearly everything to COVID. I won't go into details or draw this out. Typing this out makes my eyes well, and every hair on my body stands straight up, but damn it, I saw a human-shaped shadow in my walk-in closet. Am I going crazy? Maybe, but I know that I am not at the same time. This is what happened. I was laying on my bed browsing Reddit, and from the corner of my eye, I caught movement coming from my closet. Within literal milliseconds, I turn and see someone standing inside of it, looking right at me. I flipped out, sprung up, ran out of my room, slammed the door, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I yelled and screamed about calling police, that I had a knife, and basically acted like a scared monkey. No response. After about a minute of yelling and screaming, and realizing that I had left my phone in my bedroom to call 911, I slowly peeked in. There was simply nothing there. Nothing. No one could have gone anywhere. I am pissed and terrified about this. I saw this person. I saw their shape, their movement, their arms. There was a humanoid figure in my closet, and that is all I know. When I was 16, I started dating this 20-year-old. It was a very bad relationship in which I was cheated on and treated like crap, but that's another story. Anyway, after my 17th birthday, I finally dumped him and got him to leave me alone. A couple months later, I was on Skype with one of my old friends around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I hear tap, tap, tap on my window. Now, my bed is right next to, kind of underneath my window, and my bedroom is on the other side of the house from my parents. I asked my friend if he had heard anything, and he said no. A few seconds later, tap, 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 and he said yeah, that he had heard that. I agreed, ended the Skype call, and ran to my parents' room. I woke my mom up, and after telling her why I woke her up, she stopped being angry, and we tried to see if anyone was outside the house. No dice. So I slept in my parents' bed with them. At 17. The next day, my dad had apparently seen vague shoe prints outside my window. It happened twice more, and after the third time, my mom called the non-emergency police line and was suggested to put up a motion light and/or a security camera. We put up a motion light that day. I've yet to hear knocking on my window since the light was put up, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm about 95% certain that it's my psycho ex, because he would come to my window between 1 and 3 a.m. when we were together sometimes and knock. Also, one of my friends who had mutual friends with my ex said that my ex was in the area. He lived about 30 miles away from me, the nights when the knocking happened. So for my cheating asshole of an ex, let's not meet again. About 8 years ago, my mom, sister, niece, and I decided to go for a look around a well-known and at the time abandoned mental asylum.
the name of which is Royal Derwent Hospital, aka Willow Court, in New Norfolk, Tasmania. We started around some of the bigger main area buildings, which were fine, nothing too creepy, just a lot of mess and graffiti. I was taking some photos in one of the main halls there, and I moved backward to get a better shot. As I did, I felt a hand touch my back, and in that split second, thought that I had just stepped into one of my family members, and that they were shielding themselves from being stepped on. But as I turned around to apologize, there was no one there. In fact, I was the only one standing in my hall, as my family had moved on to another room. This creeped me out a bit, but I tried to play it off as my mind playing tricks, even though I could still feel where I had been touched. We moved through the rest of the asylum without further incident, until we made it down to where the cells were. These were a number of smaller buildings away from the main area. Most were a little bit creepy, but it was nothing too bad. Then we came to one building that was known for keeping violent patients. Within 30 seconds of being in this building, I had the most awful feeling wash over me. It was so sudden that I nearly bolted for the door. My mom got the same feeling, and we decided not to venture any further into that building and headed out. As we stepped outside, we stood for a second to gather ourselves. Then one of the heavy cell doors inside slammed shut. It was almost like an emphasis on the get out feeling that we had when we were inside. Needless to say, that pretty much did it for me, and we called it quits on our little adventure. I had to have a Ouija board for Christmas. My wife refused to buy one, so I did it anyway. One night, when my wife was out, my daughter and I tried to use the board. Nothing. The planchette didn't move at all, or if it did, I could feel my daughter pushing it. As I suspected, it's just a parlor game. Move ahead 2 weeks. While working in the garage on a guitar amplifier that I was building, I had a very strong feeling that I was being watched. As I had spent many hours previously on this project without any sensations, this was disturbing. It got so bad that I couldn't spend more than a minute or so in the garage after the initial encounter without the hairs on my neck going up. Then came the whispers. More like a shh, shh sound, actually. Kind of a be quiet between 2 or more people lurking about. This only happened when entering the garage from the house, and later when my daughter called me at work to say she heard shh, shh when entering the darkened dining room. Since she was alone at the time, I blamed it on the cats. I too experienced it in the house, but usually only when entering the garage itself. Finally, I decided that enough is enough. I went into the garage one night and yelled at whoever was there that they had to leave because they were scaring the crap out of us. No more whispers after that. I wasn't yet into paranormal investigations at the time, so I didn't have a digital audio recorder to leave in the garage overnight. It bothers me now that I had real live spirits in the house to test with, and I didn't have the equipment or the moxie to do anything. I had a dream last night that I was being shown a series of gorillas in cages. In the dream, my brother told me that they had developed new technology to allow me to feel the touch of their hands through the cages. Sort of like the suits in Ready Player One. Weird dream logic. Anyway, I'm being dragged through the enclosure, and one of the gorillas strokes my head, neck, and back. The thing is, I could actually feel this sensation in my body. I have never, ever felt anything palpably in a dream. My reaction to the sensation was a deep-set revulsion.
The creepy thing is that it felt like there was a creature surveying my sleeping body, stroking it like a piece of meat to play with, while imbuing my dreams with an excuse as to why it was happening. Stranger still was that when I opened my eyes after the dream, I could feel this huge hand cupped over my mouth. I felt completely powerless to the creature. It was as though it had little tangible intelligence, but I could feel its feral nature enjoying the moment. It felt like something had lain down behind me in bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel its massive hand over my mouth. Chalk it up to the mind playing tricks, or whatever. It was creepy and intimidating. I went camping on a hiking trail in the Shawnee State Forest. During the day, I set up camp and went fishing in a creek running along next to the campsites. Most of the day, I felt fine and peaceful. I tend to feel at home in the woods alone and fly fishing. I started a fire, started on dinner over the fire before it got dark, and stoked the fire. Once it got dark, I felt compelled to keep the fire stoked, and a feeling of panic would set in if it even began to die down. I couldn't relax. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. It got to the point where I just grabbed my light and walked out, leaving all of my stuff there. I got out to the parking lot about 1.5 miles away and tried to steel my nerves and go back, but couldn't step past the tree line. I waited all the way until morning to go back to get my stuff, and the feeling was gone. I got everything together and left. Haven't been back since. I don't know if it was a ghost or a native spirit, since this place is deep in what used to be Shawnee tribe land. I used to work in a hotel as a security guard. It was built in 1922 and had a basement. One night, the front desk clerk, the valet, and I are just hanging out in the lobby just chatting when a phone rings. The phone call was coming from the basement where there are offices. At the time, there was supposed to be no one in there. I had already locked the doors and made sure that the basement was empty. The clerk picked up the phone, heard a weird noise, and then got disconnected. It chilled me to the bones. The valet guy and I went down to make sure that it was, in fact, empty and that no one had been trespassing. The doors were still locked, and I didn't see anyone coming out, so we went inside the office. The only thing that we found was the phone blinking, and it looked like someone had picked it up and dropped it. The valet and I looked at each other, and there was cold sweat on our faces. That is one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me when working as graveyard security. I spent the weekend camping throughout the Northeast, and all was very normal and quite nice. However, last night I camped in Massachusetts in a wooded area between Providence and Plymouth. Nothing felt negative, but I saw lights at least 3 times. The last time was just minutes ago, and that's what prompted me to write this. The lights are very quick, and almost out of the corner of my eye. I don't know what to say or quite how to describe it. I've never seen anything like it. And if it was paranormal, it was very clear. However, each time, they disappeared the second that I looked directly at them. About a year ago, I bought a house and started living alone. A few months of me living there and everything seemed normal and fine, except for one morning. On that morning, I woke up and felt like I was pinned down and that my bed was moving towards the door and back toward my wall. All I remember is trying my hardest to move, but I felt paralyzed. I don't have a history of sleep paralysis, and I also have a hard time believing in ghosts, but this was a pretty crazy experience. Nothing has happened since that morning, but I still don't know what was happening.